Sorry for the slight delay, members, but I'm just waiting for my vice chairman to join me, and he is in the building, but. Right. Okay. Right. I think we're all now present and correct. And just a little tiny bit of housekeeping from this morning. I think members, you've all now got in front of you a copy of this table of the before and after inset scoring of Adams Road and the rifle range track. Which has been the subject of quite a lot of discussion already, and I want to make sure that everyone is fully aware of those scorings. Right then. So, yes, that was one of many letters which we've all received. And as I said earlier this morning, when letters are addressed to me individually, I'm often not sure that they've been shared with the rest of the Assembly and Executive Board. And I always ask for them to be shared with the members of the Assembly and Executive Board. And sometimes you've already sent them directly, and occasionally I get into trouble. But thank you very much for all the letters and representations. I've read all of them very carefully, and I've responded to those that appear to me to be individually composed, and I haven't had time to deal with all those that are slight variations on a theme. We're going to hear from the Local Liaison Forum chairperson. We're then going to have a very long list of public questions. As I said this morning, I've accepted all the public questions that came in on time. It is open to me to require questions on similar themes to nominate one individual to ask questions on behalf of all of those, but I've decided on this occasion, in view of the considerable public interest in this, to allow all the questions to be asked. But could I ask, if you're asking on a similar theme, if you could not repeat something that's already been said, and I am going to have to be quite strict on keeping questions to the 3 minutes, and they will be up when the red light shows on the traffic light in front of you on the table there. After the public questions, we'll then have officers' responses, and in fact what I'll do with those is I'll group the response from the officer according to the subject matter of the question. So there are some on East-West Rail, there are some on environmental issues, and there are quite a few on Adams Road and so on. So I'll ask the officer to respond in blocks. We'll then have officer presentation on the report, and then the Assembly members will have their debate. I do wish to stress this is not a public meeting, and so members of the public, I will ask you to not to chip in. That would be out of order. If you could reserve the discussion to the members around the table, that would be much appreciated. As I say, we'll start off first with inviting Helen Bradbury, who is the chairperson of the Local Liaison Forum, and there was a meeting of the Local Liaison Forum held on the 27th of January, which was between the publication of the papers and the meeting today. So I hope that enabled the fullest possible discussion to take place. But we'll hear from the chairperson now. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. That's okay. We've noted that. You were, so Councillor Heather Williams was present at the Local Liaison Forum meeting. Just for the sake of completion, I don't think that was necessary to declare, but thanks for the completion. Okay. Sorry to interrupt you there. The floor is yours, please. Please go ahead. Okay.
Thank you. Despite my inbox being jammed full of people throwing themselves to be the chair of this committee, it's me again, I'm afraid, for the 4th year. So the Local Liaison Forum has met actually twice since you've discussed this scheme, once on the 6th of June and once last Monday. So 18 members turned up last Monday, really everybody you'd expect from all along the route. And actually there's 100, probably 1,000 things I could say, but I'm going to just make 4 key observations. First one is that the obvious one, it's that the strategic situation has changed decisively. 3 years ago, the Cambourne to Cambridge busway, now Bus Road, was the only major piece of infrastructure west of the city, planned to serve the new housing and the local plan. Now, and with its announcement this morning, of course, we've got East-West Rail via Cambourne, and announced this morning, and that must significantly impact the business case for the bus road, which we would say was never much good anyway. It doesn't take much imagination to think that working people in Cambourne and coming further west will take the train to Cambridge South and then on to Cambridge Central and Cambridge North. And we think it's unwise and premature to suggest that this 191 million pound bus road plus 66 million maintenance costs in its lifetime plus is simply complementary to the rail, page 114 of your report. We think officers need to prove that. And as a taxpayer, I would actually expect them to. So in light of this, the LLF asked the GCP to pause the Cambourne to Cambridge scheme while the impact of the new rail service is assessed and the business case for the bus road revised. And that was a unanimous resolution. That's my point one. Point two, despite what is implied in these papers, the two most reasonable alternatives to this scheme have never been adequately investigated. Firstly, an optimised end-to-end on-road comparator, I don't know how often I've come here and said that, has never been drawn up and evaluated versus the off-road, and that is deeply surprising at best. And by a unanimous vote in June, we asked for it to be kept on the table and worked up. And yet what we have in the papers today is nothing more than a do-nothing comparator. It's the City 4 bus. And that all seems very cynical. Secondly, an off-road comparison compliant with CAM, seeing as the Mayor came in, over a year ago now, and insisted that it had to be compliant with CAM, has also never been drawn up and properly assessed. I mean, the Mott MacDonald were asked last spring to do this technical note, which they published in May. I have the front page. I think on your instruction, technical note. Its first iteration had no bus road drawn in. Its second iteration had no evaluation against the preferred option. And when we asked back in June that evaluation could take place, we were told the case was closed. And it had many advantages, actually. Firstly, that it was on the far side of the A428, where the park and ride actually is. So that would have prevented the very obvious, appalling outcome we now see at Hardwick. The alignment would dovetail quite nicely, actually, with the new rail link, because it provides connectivity with the science park, as well as the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, and it would connect through Eddington. And we know that's a big growth area. And actually, alignment via Girton, or just south of Girton, which was what we were proposing, is the most future-proofed of all, because we know Girton at some point is going to be significantly enlarged. And it's a great shame it was whitewashed, and that's what we consider it to have been. And ditto with the Joint Assembly commissioned Quick Win on Madingley Road paper, published as a technical note in May. Its conclusions are just not credible, that the only bus lane on Madingley Hill, Madingley Road, is a few hundred metres outbound towards the roundabout. That's not a narrow road. And that is deeply troubling. And actually, I would also just say that not investigating reasonable alternatives does leave the scheme vulnerable when it comes to judicial reviews. But with the advent of East-West Rail via Cambourne, via unanimous decision on Monday, the LLF now asks the Joint Assembly to reconsider recommending a continuous inbound busway on the A1303 as a cheap and effective solution, whilst the bigger picture continues to take shape. It would also be enough to satisfy the local plan. So that's my second point. Third point is, despite 3 years of asking, we still do not know how long these buses will take to reach meaningful end destinations. And is that not the whole point? And why do we not know that? My fourth point, my final point, is that as my colleague from Hardwick said in the meeting on Monday, GCP have never listened to anybody. We have been totally ignored, and consultation is a sham. And as a result, for more than half its length, from the point where the bus road arrives in Hardwick to its finish on Grange Road, it is deeply opposed by all the local communities en route. It doesn't help that the consultant's presentation and Q&A session on Monday whitewashed the legitimate concerns of local communities and rode roughshod over all contrary views. And I think the degree and spread of opposition is now a big problem. So back in June, the LLF asked GCP, for example, to consider what they were doing along St Neots Road with 8 lanes of traffic overlooking the houses there, the loss of 1.7 miles of mature tree protection, but no changes have been made. And it didn't cut the mustard that we were told, or those people who raised those issues were told that, that the scheme would pass because there would be 10% biodiversity gain overall. I mean, talk about taking one for the team. I mean, so that was Hardwick. Back in June, we also asked GCP to consider their plans to concrete the National Trust covenants on Madingley Hill, views of King's College Chapel, as we doubted they could be mitigated. It's the only raised point west of the city, remember. Again, nothing has changed. And we're still assured that the widening of the A1303 would be more harmful than the environment, even though it's the main road. And hundreds of heavy vehicles thunder along there every day. Representatives are also told that the bus road will have minimum impacts on noise pollution and safety, despite its alarming proximity to our communities, and that those concerns will be dealt with in future reports. That's just not good enough. And also reasonable, or what would be considered appropriate mitigation methods, like cut and cover, which was proposed originally round Coton and not now on the table. We were told that 10,000 vehicle movements would be required to make it happen, which, whether or not that's right, we don't know. But that's fewer than 2 months of heavy traffic movements residents of our small villages will have to endure in perpetuity. And that was before it became official on Monday, that you could actually drive a coach and horses through the scheme. The X5, any compliant coach, minibuses. And now there's Adams Road too, a late addition to the army of objectors. And finally, an environmental assessment of the rifle range track was done last summer, which showed that it was a problem. And I gather you've got a report on that. A presentation on Monday from Save the West Fields highlighted how weak the legal case law had been. And so we received a presentation from the Residents' Association of Adams Road, raising 4 objections to the scheme there. One, that it's the city's busiest peak time cycle route, and it is incompatible with 220 buses sharing the space. That's not including all the additional compliant vehicles. Secondly, that complex junctions at each end will be a safety hazard. There's a blind corner, a 4-way junction, reversing lorries. Thirdly, the notion that CAM will make it all temporary was doubted. And fourth, that it had been rushed through at the last minute without proper impact assessments and consultation. And the LLF agreed with them, and so we added it to our unanimous resolution listing reasons for GCP to pause the scheme. So we ask you to seize the opportunity East West Rail presents and pause, hopefully actually ditch, this scheme of yesterday. It has a far from proven business case, even with its new local BCR calculation, a huge price tag, actually 253 million plus with its long-term needs. Too much opposition, too many compromises, and too many mistakes in process. And we would ask you to put an interim inbound bus lane on Madingley Road. We actually know that can happen because it was one of the original 5 propositions in 2015. Consider north of the A428 to Girton for any future complementary alignment, but only when we fully understand the bigger picture. Thank you.
Right then. Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive report of 2 local liaison forum meetings. Much appreciated. Thank you. Yeah, you're free to go. Yeah. Thank you very much. That brings me to the public questions, and we'll start with Matthew Brown, please.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Joint Assembly. Thank you for having me today. I'm Matthew Brown, the Superintendent of Cambridge American Cemetery, and as such, I'm coming before you today as a representative of the U.S. government with a very small interest in your project, which is the cultural heritage site of the American Cemetery that lies on Madingley Road, the west side of Cambridge, right in the area where this development project is looking to take place. And I come today before you to ask, to pose a simple question to the Joint Assembly, that recalling that Cambridge American Cemetery is both an American cultural heritage site listed by the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts and a British cultural heritage site listed under Historic England as a Grade 1 heritage site. I'd like to solicit from the Commission how you will go about mitigating or eliminating risks of environmental damage, noise pollution, visual pollution, and emissions pollution to this and to other cultural heritage sites in this region. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, you're free to go. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. Yes, I'm sorry. We'd love to hear more from you, but that was you summed it up perfectly. That was great. Much appreciated. Nick Hadley, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Hadley from a company called Cambridge Innovation Parks. We own and run Cambridge Innovation Park North in Waterbeach, and we are planning, small p, planning a further business park on the A428, right on the border of the new project, which we might be in a minority, but we hugely support. My question is this: our business is about economic development and employment. That's what we do. We provide all of those. So my question is, how do our values align with the values and objectives of this project to bring economic development and employment to that corridor? I want to make sure we're doing the same things that you are, and vice versa would be great. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. And I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to have some answers to these questions on cultural.
Good afternoon, everyone. We now know that the route of the East-West Rail will go via Cambourne, and that this will have significant impacts on the business case for the busway. It will also open up possibilities of an interim solution, which is that in the short term, an inbound-only bus lane could be provided along the A1303. This could be achieved much more quickly, at significantly less cost, with much less impact on the environment, greenbelt, and local communities. This could be in place whilst the new railway is being progressed. The railway would eventually provide the mass transport solution for the Cambourne area, with the bus lane continuing to provide access to the west of Cambridge. Cycle provision could be achieved via a branch of the Comerton Greenway, a route which we have already recommended as being better for cyclists because it would be more gradual climb up the hill and away from traffic. So therefore, is it not premature or sensible, would it be more sensible to pause and take stock of the alternative options that the new railway might create? Thank you. I have got a second question.
Yes.
Shall I do that whilst I'm here?
No, if you could ask your second question next, and then we can
thank
start
you.
giving answers. Yeah.
So now that we have finally seen a preferred route for the busway, we can also see what the impact of this would be. This route would clear fell over 500 metres of woodland alongside St Neots Road. It would go through grassland habitat at Madingley Mulch, which would be built over. Hedgerows on My Charity's land at Cambridge Past, Present and Future would be severed. Orchard trees would be destroyed and uprooted. Meadows bisected. Scrub in a city wildlife site would be destroyed, and ponds would be infilled next to the university sports ground. Also, a large scar on the landscape will be created during construction, which will take years to recover. It only took me half a day's work to go and photograph all that and prepare a presentation for the local liaison forum. So my question is, why have those impacts not been detailed in the officer's report? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay, you're free to go. Now, Peter, if you could leave the East-West Rail till the next batch of questions, because James had two questions, but if you could leave the answer on the East-West Rail till we've heard the questions that are coming after that, if you could address the first four questions, first three questions on the cultural and environmental heritage and habitat and ecology.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just rejig my... I was going to start with East-West Rail. Okay. So in terms of the liaison forum, I think there were a number of issues that were raised in terms of assessments that have gone on. So assessments have been undertaken on an optimised comparator. Assessments are directly outlined in the report regarding northern alignment and indeed Madingley Hill, and we had a conversation earlier in today's session around the troubles of acquiring land and the timescales that meets. We try to outline on Monday evening at the Liaison Forum, and I'll outline again that this scheme has changed as a result of consultation. So Assembly members will note that the Park and Ride site proposal has changed, that the alignments have moved in Adams Road, and we've taken on board suggestions around noise barriers and the like. I don't think it's fair to suggest that all the communities on the route are deeply opposed to it. And indeed, the public consultations don't demonstrate that. Hardwick, for example, supports an off-road route. What it is correct to suggest is that there are differences of opinion. And what the report has tried to do, using the appraisal guidance that we're given, is outline that and recognise that there are impacts, both societal and environmental, in whatever set of proposals come forward, and they need to be carefully balanced. And that's what the proposal tries to do. In terms of the question around the American cemetery, we're really trying to address the congestion problems that already exist and that will get markedly worse. And again, what we've tried to do is to balance these considerations. The conclusion that the paper draws is that we would move public transport, walking and cycling away from Madingley Hill environment because of some of the issues that you've raised, but also because of that tightly constrained environment. But we have already commenced discussions with local communities around detailed design proposals. Ordinarily, that comes later as a later stage of a project, but we've started those discussions already, and we'll do a presentation, Chair, when we go through the report later on that will pick up on some of them. And there's an absolute commitment that those discussions need to continue around the detailed elements to demonstrate how we abate or mitigate issues of environmental visibility, noise, and the like. In terms of the strategic question and the linkages with business and growth, then the Greater Cambridge Partnership delivering the city deal was a recognition that growth in this area has, delivered huge benefits, but there have been consequences. One of those consequences is the impact on our roads, the impact on our air, And what this scheme does is to say there is already a problem 8 miles from here to Cambridge. It will take well over an hour in the morning peak. Actually, that problem is going to get markedly worse. There are thousands of new homes planned under the current local plan, and we need to come forward with a sustainable way of dealing with that. So that very much is underlying the business case that we bring forward here. I'm skipping over East West Rail, aren't I?
Yeah.
So in terms
we're not
of...
going to ignore it completely because we
Yeah.
have to, we're going to answer it after the
Just
next
in
few
terms of the thought process. So in terms of James Little's question around environmental assessments, environmental assessments are included as part of the work, have been included throughout the work to date, and is part of the considerations for the Assembly and for the board in 3 weeks' time. There is a formal environmental impact assessment stage, which is the next stage that will commence, subject to any decisions being taken forward. And that work will simply go up a gear. There will be a formal consultation during the summer that will deal with that. So the report outlines some of these careful issues that we need to balance, and tries to condense that with the requirements that we're given from Department of Transport and HM Treasury in a format that the Assembly and that the board can consider and comment upon.
Thank you very much. So hold in mind your response to Mr. Littlewood's question on East West Rail, and we'll have a few more questions on East West Rail, starting with Carolyn Postgate, please.
Good afternoon. Most of my question has already been voiced by other people, but and I have also made changes to the published one that you have in front of you. So starting with, the government today has announced that the proposed East-West Rail link connecting Oxford and Cambridge will be routed through Bedford to reach Cambridge via Cambourne. I understand that how can the GCP justify pressing forward with a costly off-road bus road from Cambourne to Cambridge if a fast, reliable rail link is going to exist within the next 10 years? With a station at Cambourne, it's clear that the EWR scheme will provide good connections for people within a few miles of Cambourne, thus including Bourne Airfield Village, to Cambridge stations, serving the city centre, science park and biomedical campus, the most important employment sites. What last mile journeys does GCP envisage will then be served by the proposed bus road, and how many people will that benefit?
Thank you very much. The next question is from Alan Treacy.
Good afternoon. It's Alan Tracy, by the way.
Tracy, I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Don't blame me for the spelling. My question is on the East-West Rail as well. The East-West Rail route announced today will have an impact on the BCR calculations carried out by Mott MacDonald in respect of the Cambourne to Cambridge busway. Will the GCP please confirm that the BCR will be recalculated and published once the detailed East-West Rail route is announced, and that benefits accruing to the rail project will not also be attributed to the busway?
Thank you very much. Especially the point about double counting, and I'm sure the Transport Director will now wrap up those 3 questions on East-West Rail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So just in case people are not aware, the Secretary of State in Parliament today announced that East-West Rail route corridor would come via Cambourne. It was one of the proposals they consulted upon earlier in 2019. I was on a conference call with the Chief Executive of East-West Rail this morning. So I think it's important just to position what East-West Rail does and what the next steps are. So East-West Rail, along with the Expressway, are 2 projects that are targeted at delivering the Oxford to Cambridge arc that will deliver, in theory, 1 million new homes over that corridor when these projects are constructed and delivered. So what we can expect in Cambourne is a significant increase in housing growth beyond the existing local plan period, and the existing local plan level. What we don't know is what they are yet. And we don't know that because there are two next steps that the Chief Executive of East West Rail confirmed this morning would take place. One is, albeit a broad route corridor has been agreed, no route alignment has been agreed and the work is yet to commence. So that will start in earnest after today. They will be in contact with local landowners, environmental surveys, and everything that we've done in terms of our scheme. So that piece of work will sort of commence in earnest. The second piece of work relates to the business case. And the business case for East West Rail, which I said is predicated on delivering, if not 1 million homes, then a proportion of 1 million homes by whatever date they choose to use, that will need to be undertaken and will need to be assessed in accordance with Treasury Green Book requirements. Once that is done, and that may very well take some period of time, that we weren't given a timescale this morning, and we will continue to chase that with East West Rail colleagues, then we will then be able to assess what, if any, of the impacts are for Cambourne to Cambridge, beyond the local plan period and the local plan housing growth and development growth that Cambourne to Cambridge is already seeking to undertake. So in terms of the links, we have had conversations with East West Rail colleagues. It is clear that the two schemes will work well with each other. What we need to do, following their announcement today, is allow them to understand far more about their business case that is looking many years into the future with many, many, many thousands of new homes within our area. So if that work is concluded by East West Rail in the relatively near future, and that would probably be measured in years rather than months, then we would be able to reflect it within a revised business case. But there is some way to go before that actually happens. I hope that was helpful, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much. And that takes us into the next block of questions. Excuse me. The first one is Jane Renwick.
Okay, good afternoon. I know it has been touched on, particularly by the conclusions from Helen Bradbury from the LLF meeting, but I'd just like to underline the amount of opposition that has actually been, well, always been there, but it's grown up considerably since this proposed route alignment now has been published, and it has resulted in huge opposition right from Hardwick all the way through to Grange Road. And given that means that now 2/3 of the proposed route is so deeply unpopular, is it not time to reconsider this misguided and damaging route alignment?
Thank you very much. The next question is Alistair Burford. Middle one, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That's it. Thank you very much.
As if I shouldn't know. I refer to page 116, 5.9, figure 4, the reliability comparison of the non-segregated route versus the segregated routes. Interestingly, the illustration shows that the bus lanes perform as well as the guided busway, and furthermore, the Cambourne to Madley Mulch illustration is equally favourable on the existing road without any kind of bus priority. This seems to undermine any claims that the off-road busway is required for reliability. Despite this, the officers continue to insist that the off-road route from Cambourne to Adams Road is the only feasible option. They insist it's the only feasible option because it's CAM compliant, despite the high level of uncertainty surrounding the nascent CAM scheme and its costings. They insist it's only feasible even though it exposes residents on St Neots Road, Hardwick, to 8 lanes of traffic in front of their properties. They insist that it's only feasible option even though it causes permanent damage to the iconic Coton corridor. And all this at a cost of, at the moment, 200 million. As I said, figure 4 shows that despite the absence of any kind of bus priority, the service from Cambourne to Madley-Moche is already as reliable as the segregated routes. The problem is Madley Hill. The officers have looked at the feasibility of building a busway down Madley Hill and have informed the board that it is not possible. However, a number of technical groups outside of the GCP believe that an on-road bus lane down Madley Hill with smart, prioritised signalling at the narrowest point outside the American cemetery, it would be possible, and it could be developed much quicker and for a lot less money. Given all of the above, coupled with the unacceptable BCR, that's before LVU, which could be applied to any successful scheme, the lack of support from so many of your constituents, your councillors, conservation groups, surely this Assembly should be telling the board not to support this inaptly named preferred route and asking the officers to look at ways of making an on-road bus lane work for the entire route. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, do I have Terry Spencer here? Yes. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. During the last 4 years, the GCP representatives has mentioned that there will be bus routes to 3 destinations in Cambridge, namely the city centre, the biomedical campus and the science park. Now, if the GCP preferred option were to be approved, we all know that the buses would have to pass through narrow, congested streets as soon as they reach the edge of Cambridge, near the University Athletics Ground. These streets, which include Adams Road, Silver Street and Downing Street, are heavily used already by cyclists, pedestrians and tourists. These streets are already unsuitable for the frequent passage of large bus service vehicles. Now, if the Cam Metro is never built, the inner city realm will either be severely impacted by the scale of bus services required to meet projected demand from population growth, or it will be impossible to run a high-frequency bus service into Drummer Street because of the spatial constraints. A major increase in large bus vehicles coming into the city centre at high frequency would be highly damaging, both to the historic core and for people's general well-being. We believe that Cambridge heritage is far too precious to allow that to happen. So I've got 3 questions very quickly. Firstly, what are the exact routes that are being considered between the end of the proposed off-road busway at Grange Road and the 3 destinations mentioned, before the CAM is completed? Secondly, how can the GCP claim in figure 4 in the agenda pack, which Alistair has just mentioned, that the reliability of the preferred off-road option is higher than the on-road options between Madley-Moche roundabout and the city centre, when this option is likely to pass along heavily congested and narrow streets between West Cambridge and the city centre? Thirdly, how can the GCP state that the off-road option will be future-proofed, i.e. CAM compliant, when this option will rely on the completion of the CAM scheme, which is being considered by the local authority, the combined authority? Has the GCP taken into account the likelihood that the CAM scheme will not be constructed using rubber-tired buses in tunnels because it is too high a risk to attract investment, and partly because it uses unproven technology?
Thank you very much. Yep, that's great. Much appreciated. And the final question I'm taking in this group is on behalf of Gabriel Fox, and it's Dr. Marilyn Tracy. Is that right? Yeah.
Despite the GCP's insistence for the past 5 years that the C2C scheme has to be off-road and segregated. Their proposed route turns out to be 60% on-road, with no bus segregation for services between Cambourne and the biomedical campus, and 40% on-road for services to the city centre. On-road stretches include the first mile out of Cambourne towards Bourne Airfield Village, 25 mph roads through the West Cambridge site, Adams Road, Grange Road, the Backs, Silver Street, Trumpington Road, Pembroke Street, Downing Street, plus Regent Street and Lensfield Road on the way back, as well as 7 kilometres of the M11 for the route to CBC. Some of these are amongst the most congested streets in the city. Given this clear admission that off-road is not obligatory, and given the evidence provided by GCP in Figure 4 of the Joint Assembly report that bus lanes are just as reliable as off-road busways, why has the GCP not worked up the best possible route using on-road bus lanes? Even on the busiest city streets, such as Newmarket Road, bus lanes offer just as good reliability as a busway, if not better. And GCP has accepted in its meetings with the LLF technical group that a bus lane is technically feasible for the whole way inbound between Madingley Mulch and West Cambridge site, and most of the way outbound too, even without any significant land acquisition. So 2 questions. Is it not the case that a route including bus lanes along the stretch would be at least as fast and reliable as GCP's proposed route and offer many-fold improvement in BCR, both the official one and the made-up local BCR? Question 2. GCP has used excuse after excuse and tactic after tactic to avoid doing a proper comparative evaluation of a segregated on-road route. Without that, we are in danger of having £200 million of taxpayers' money wasted on a scheme that is inferior to one that could be implemented in half the time and at a quarter of the cost. Will the GCP finally agree to working up an optimal on-road route with the local community? Thank you.
Thank you very much. If Peter, if you could respond to that block of questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we touched upon opposition earlier on, and I think I gave a comment that said, I don't accept there is huge opposition. I accept there are a lot of people in the audience today who oppose it, but over the last 5 years as we've developed this scheme and the 3 sets of consultations that have been undertaken, there are people that have supported and continue to support the scheme. And so, yes, there is opposition, but yes, there are people who support it. In terms of the business case and the assessment, and I suppose it's come out in a couple of the questioners that, well, start with you should only do the off-road, the on-road, and then work out how you do it. What we're obliged to do by HM Treasury and Department for Transport guidelines is assess the options, and that's what the business case does, and it says that actually there are impacts for and against on all of the options, and they need to be balanced, and they need to be balanced in accordance with the criteria that we're given, and that's what's before the Assembly today and before the Board. So in terms of an off-road option, is significantly more reliable and is quicker, reduces journey time from 50 minutes to 31. It does. I accept that people have questioned in the liaison forum, and we've sat down with the technical group on 10 occasions, 11 occasions in the last 12 months, and we've gone through that work in terms of the optimised alternatives. We've gone through that work in terms of the northern alignment. Sorry, jumping around. I've gone the wrong way. So in terms of Mr. Spencer's question around when it accesses the city and the impact on that, the report makes clear that whilst this is focused on dealing with the growth and the challenges on the Cambourne and Cambridge corridor as they exist now and going forward, that it is part of a wider network. Not just part of a GCP's wider network, but then it ultimately links with the Mayor and Combined Authorities' proposed network around the metro. That's what it's seeking to deliver collectively to deal with the challenge across the piece that we've got. We are working with Combined Authority on linkages with the CAM, and Combined Authority officers have been supportive in terms of drafting this paper. But the business case for Cambourne to Cambridge, because it has to comply with Treasury guidance, has to stand on its own 2 feet. So whilst the Metro is a consideration, what is before you is the business case, which needs to be assessed on its own merits. We produced a bus strategy as part of that business case. That very much builds on the evidence base that exists with the existing Cambridge busway, which is a perfect test bed, because that has demonstrated what has happened when you put this segregated infrastructure in. I'm sure you're aware that in recent weeks, Stagecoach have announced that they're enhancing the service on that route to a 5-minute frequency. So what we've been able to do with that bus strategy is just outline what it may very well look like, but there is more work to do in the intervening period with Stagecoach and bus operators around what the final service patterns will be. In terms of Gabriel Fox's comments, so I think the first question was around the comparison between on and off-road. No, the business case is quite clear. The off-road is better. It's quite clear. There's been no assertion at any of the technical groups that the on-road will deliver along Madingley Hill. That's simply not the case. A comparison has been undertaken of the optimised routes in accordance with the guidance that were provided to adhere to, and that has been outlined in previous documentation, and indeed in terms of the wider documentation for this meeting, Chair.
Okay, right then, that takes us into the final block of questions, and we start with Mr. Dan Strauss.
Thank you very much. I'm the organiser of a petition to stop Adams Road becoming a busway and the Rifle Range route to be readopted. Adams Road is 8 metres wide, buses are 3 metres wide, and there will be no dedicated cycle lanes. This decision will affect the lives of thousands of cyclists and pedestrians. It will be based on the scores produced by Mott MacDonald in the inset assessment, which you all have. Last time the Rifle Range track scored highest. Now Adams Road does. So what's changed and where's the evidence? Time's short, so I can only look at 3 criteria. Reliability of journey, that's bus journeys. Now the Rifle Range has been downgraded from 7 to 3, a 57% decrease. Now Mott say they've identified additional users of the Rifle Range, but they don't say who, how many, and how frequently they use it. What we do have evidence for is the users of Adams Road, 5,900 cyclists a day. And on Adams Road, unlike Rifle Range, there's no space to segregate cyclists from buses. It's not credible that journey time reliability would fall 57% on a segregated route like Rifle Range because of a handful of unidentified additional users. Public acceptability. Which of these routes is more acceptable to the public? Rifle Range drops from 5 to 1, an 80% decrease. The Rifle Range say the GCP is now highly unacceptable. So who have they been listening to? Not the 3,000 people who signed this petition, or the 5,900 cyclists who use Adams Road. Instead, a college and a rugby club have bent their ear because Steel Bodger's rugby match visitors want somewhere to park. Walking and cycle connectivity. Anyone who knows the area knows that Adams Road is the obvious east-west route from West Cambridge into the city centre, and yet it scores 3, slight negative. Rifle Range scores 7, significant positive. Again, no evidence. But the safety scores are the most alarming. Adams Road scores 3 and Rifle Range 3. A road of 5,900 cyclists, 3 junctions, 37 vehicle access points, 81 HGVs lorries which reverse into Robinson's Yard, gets the same safety rating The same safety rating as a segregated busway with the occasional lawnmower. Incredible. Plus, GCP traffic survey data shared with us 1 week before papers were published. Previous stats were 9 years old. And this for a road where bike use increased 300% in 10 years. No pedestrian surveys, by the way. No comparative survey work on the rifle range track, just assertions that landowners are concerned about access issues. We know the rugby club's access from Grange Road. Who are they listening to? A rugby club and a Cambridge college, or thousands of cyclists and pedestrians? Can the Joint Assembly inform the Executive Board of this petition, signed by 3,000 people, and abandon using Adams Road for the busway and revert to the rifle range route? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Strauss. He did hand the petition to me just before we resumed, and as I said at the beginning of the meeting, we weren't able to take this officially as part of the agenda, but members are aware of its existence and that many of the signatories are Cambridge residents. Yeah. Okay, I have, yes, Cam Cycle again. Thank you.
CamCycle supports all forms of sustainable transport. However, we are gravely concerned about the Adams Road section of the proposals. Almost 6,000 people per day cycle there, peaking at over 800 people per hour on busy days. The anticipated expansion of the West Cambridge site will further increase these numbers by thousands of people per day. We have been informed that the future plans could mean that there would be 30 buses per hour running on Adams Road, which is just 8 metres wide between the curbs. Past experience with similar situations on a shared section of the guided busway route gives us cause for concern, such as the incident on 21st of June 2017 when a bus driver attempted an unsafe pass of some cyclists and drove the bus into a wall near the Cambridge assessment site. Our first question: we ask the Joint Assembly to give careful consideration to the implications of putting that many buses along Adams Road and whether the project is trying to cut a little bit of cost by shifting injury risk onto members of the public. The Adams Road route mixes buses with thousands of people cycling daily, while the Rifle Range route does not. Yet according to Mott MacDonald's inset assessment criteria in the third options assessment report, both Adams Road and the Rifle Range route are scored the same in terms of safety. We find this hard to believe. Our second question: we ask the Joint Assembly to consider this discrepancy in the inset safety assessment and whether this is an indication of a rushed proposal that has not been fully worked out yet in terms of risks and mitigations. We have a petition with over 3,000 signatories, people who really do want to be able to cycle to work and home safely. So we ask the Joint Assembly to recommend to the Executive Board that the Adams Road route option not be pursued because its safety risks have not been adequately explored.
Thank you very much. Now, I gather we don't have Dr. Colin Harris here, is that right? I'm going to read his question then on his behalf. The C2C plan shows the busway extending to Grange Road following a route via Adams Road. The GCP has published plans in support of the CAM scheme, and as such we assume this is GCP policy. Can the GCP please explain how the Adams Road section of the proposed Western busway is compatible with the proposed CAM tunnel scheme? Will this section not be redundant when a tunnel is built? And if so, is it not unjustified to use public funds for a scheme that is likely to be redundant well before the end of the lifetime of the busway scheme? And the final question is from Roger Tomlinson.
Good afternoon. Chairman, it's plain that officers are determined to champion this route and push it through, but in my view and a lot of other people, there has been a lack of transparency and honest accuracy. I know some members of the Joint Assembly don't like these questions, but after 5 years of obfuscation, we'd like some complete answers for you. Freedom of Information requests revealed that after the Joint Assembly in November 2018, the one at which you let this preferred route go through, county transport staff, i.e. inside the Greater Cambridge Partnership, identified that the Natural England and Historic England reports on the route had been misrepresented and key information omitted in the Mock MacDonald and Transport Director's reports to almost reverse their meaning. Quite quickly, Cambridge Past, Present and Future, the external government agencies and the National Trust were aware of this. I do have the text of both the summary that the staff identified and the misinterpretations made of the Natural England report. However, no changes were made to the report when it went to the December 2018 Executive Board, which approved this preferred route. And they weren't told about the errors and omissions. James Littlewood did ask a question, but which was not answered in the meeting. So nobody was aware of it. We followed this up with further FOIs on the communications between Mock MacDonald and the Transport Director, but these had been refused, claiming exemption under the Environmental Information Regulations. Some members may be amused that these state there is a specific interest in transparency with regard to democratic decision-making process regarding the project. When we advised the ICO about this meeting today, they issued their response yesterday. The Information Commissioner has adjudicated and ruled that the county transport officers must release this information to us. This question is not for answering by the officers, frankly. Are Joint Assembly members happy to be making crucial decisions based on incomplete and erroneous reports? Chairman, if yourself or any member of the Joint Assembly wants, I do have, it's only a few sentences, the text of what was omitted and erroneously reported.
Just hang on there. Okay, I'm advised that officers only received this adjudication yesterday and they have to prepare their response, but they will get a response in time, well in time, I'm assuming, for the Executive Board meeting. So I think I should leave it there, unless, I mean, So the adjudication from the Information Commissioner's office is that those missing lines have to be released. Is that right?
They have ruled that because the failure to change the content of the report happened after the Joint Assembly meeting, that means there is no defence to the argument that it's in draft, and therefore we are to see the communications between Mock MacDonald and the officers about why there was no change in the report and the surrounding communications. So it's only 2 or 3 sentences if you would like me to read it out. I think for accuracy, members of the public ought to be aware of what was omitted, particularly given the point made from the American Cemetery representative this morning.
Yes. Members, I think this is quite a serious point. I'm going to call 5 minutes adjournment whilst I get some advice on how to tackle this. Mr. Tomlinson, you're free to return to the floor, and then we may come back on this. Had 10 minutes recess. Yes. No. Everyone's going to resume. Yes. I'm sorry that that adjournment was slightly 10 minutes instead of 5 minutes. Given how recently the adjudication has been received, I'm going to invite, first of all, the Chief Executive, possibly with help from the Transport Director, to answer from a process point of view. But I'm assured that as to the substance, we will get a full treatment of that from the Mott MacDonald representatives. So.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we only received this very late yesterday, so clearly we need some time to look at the findings of the Information Commissioner and decide what we want to do next. We have the option of appealing that decision or then complying with their recommendation. We have 35 days in which to do that. I would like to say to the Assembly, though, we will make sure we have done that in time for the board meeting, which is obviously in 3 weeks' time, so we will have concluded that review of the ICO's findings within that time. Nevertheless, what the substantive issue is here is about whether we fully published representations from statutory organisations and others about their views of the scheme. And they are all published, as is a detailed response to the questionnaire on this issue, and they are all available online. I am more than happy to commit to the Assembly that we will send links to those documents and make it very clear and share some of that detailed response that we've given previously on this topic to members of the Assembly. It doesn't substantially change the nature of the documents in front of you in any way. The issue is whether internal emails about those documents are shared. As I say, substantially, it's about you having access to that information, and that information is now all available and published in full on the website.
Okay. And I'm sorry for the interruption between the questions and the answers. Very briefly.
It seemed, if it was important enough to be subject to this discussion with the Information Commission, maybe it is worth just that being highlighted to members of the Assembly, because there's a lot of information in all the reports associated with this.
We will make sure. The guys from Mott MacDonald have undertaken to highlight that particular issue, because, as I say, from my point of view, it was...
Right, but before we discuss it at the right now, I mean, it's surely not a problem to highlight what the mistake was. Sorry.
We'll find that link and send it round if you're suggesting you're going to be able to read that whilst we're debating the item. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about sharing the information that we've answered on this topic before.
Right. No, sorry, Mr. Thompson, I can't allow you to come back because it isn't a public meeting. I think you raised a very serious point, which I have required the Chief Executive and the Transport Director to go and address. They've undertaken to do that well in time for the Executive Board, and we are assured that the representatives of Mott MacDonald are going to highlight that particular environmental report when they give their presentation, so that there will be very, very specific signposting to this report in its completeness when they give their presentation. And I think I'll have to leave it there. Mr. Blake, if you could finish answering the questions that were asked before the adjournment. And I'm really sorry to everyone to have prolonged the proceedings, but I felt that was quite an important point too.
Thank you, Chair. So there were a couple of questions about the inset analysis, and you've asked us specifically to cover that in the presentation. So we will go through that in detail at that point. There was a comment around the cycling and buses in a similar environment. And I think the point I've raised earlier around ordinarily we don't start the design process this early, but we've done that to try and engage effectively with local communities and local stakeholders, and that process will continue as we go forward. In terms of Dr. Harris's question around the links with the CAM scheme, if the CAM comes forward and there is a tunnel portal on the West Cambridge site, then whatever option beyond the West Cambridge site is developed would not be used once the metro system is up and running, so it would revert to a public road or the like. But that would apply both to Adams Road and to a rifle range option, because the issues would be the same. So, Chair, we'll pick up the inset point in the presentation, and perhaps if we that will start to answer some of the other questions as well.
Thank you very much. In fact, it's at this point that you proceed to introduce the report.
So in that context, I'm just going to briefly introduce the paper, and then colleagues Joe Baker from Mott MacDonald's and Laura Gates from GCP are just going to go through the business case and the stakeholder elements of it, just to bring that to life. The decision that will be put to the Executive Board is around alignment. What will not go to the Executive Board is around the detailed design, because that, along with the environmental assessment, is the next step in the process. And so those conversations will continue and will be reflected in future areas of work. The scheme has been in development for 5 years. The strategic case, if anything, has got stronger over that period of time because traffic has got worse over that period. The local plan growth in this area is significant, and indeed this scheme forms part of the infrastructure programme to deliver the local plan for growth at Bourne Airfield, West Cambourne, West Cambridge and the like. We've adopted, as we're required, the approach from government in terms of the formal assessment process, which is why we are obliged to start with strategic case and then balance up the various options and alternatives, which is what the business case seeks to do. I think the final bit from me is just firmly positioning this as part of a network, and there are figures 1 and figures 2 on page 112 and 113. Just position this both within the Greater Cambridge Partnerships infrastructure plans, and that this forms part of the surface network that we are developing, both for public transport but also walking and cycling, but also in terms of the linkage with the Cambridge Autonomous Metro and working with the Mayor and the Combined Authority in terms of delivering that. As I've said previously, whilst we will work with them and need to be cognizant of the development of the Metro, this business scheme, this business case for the scheme has to stand on its own merits, and that is what is being presented to you and to the board in 3 weeks' time. And on that note, I'll stop and hand over to Joe, I think.
You were going to give us a fly-through first, the fly-through video?
Even better, thank you, Chair.
Yes.
So what we have is a is a slide through. This is illustrative. So again, based on the comment around more detailed design and more to do. So this is just to give an impression, recognise that there would be more work to do on this as we take the scheme forward.
and Laura Gates, or Joe Baker from McDonald, and Laura Gates, who's a GCP officer, to take us through the proposals on the paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm acutely aware of the time, so we will try and move through and maybe pick up particularly some of the salient points that have been raised from the floor today and focus on some of those. Just to reiterate the background to the scheme, why we are here. The purpose of the scheme is not purely to build a transport scheme. It is to deal with the pressure placed on the transport system from local plan growth and the type of growth that the SPIRE report is envisaging. It is specifically the development that is envisaged in those planning documents. So the homes plan for Cambourne West, Bourne Airfield, North West Cambridge. As Peter referred to, there may be other development associated with East West Rail. That is not considered in the business case of the scheme at the moment. Also, the estimated increase in jobs at locations such as West Cambridge. We have an existing situation where car usage is high, and there is a need to address that, and particularly the level of growth that will be seen in the interpeak. The morning peak hour will not grow because it is already so congested, but the rest of the day will become increasingly congested. The strategic case of the scheme also reflects the other transport investment in the area. We are mindful of and reflect things like CAM and East West Rail, but in line with government guidance, the business case is for a freestanding scheme, and it is assessed on its own merits, not as part of that wider network. In terms of the background to the scheme, we're all aware of things like the unaffordability of housing, the levels of congestion on the corridor, and I would presume to dwell on those hugely in this stage. Just a little recap for our members on project development. This project has been some time in the cooking. Started in 2015, where the local liaison forum was constituted. There was an initial round of public consultation, the first of 3 major rounds of public consultation. A strategic outline business case was published in 2016. There have been multiple rounds of optioneering, many options, north of, south of, and along the A428, A1303 corridor have been assessed over that 5-year period. Many of those have been taken to the different consultations. There have been additional workshops, LLF sessions, LLF technical working group sessions, and a number of changes, some of which I'll talk about as I go through the presentation, have been made to the scheme in light of some of the feedback that we've had. So a lengthy process to try and address some immediate challenges on the transport system in this part of Cambridge. In terms of the options assessment, an on-road option has been assessed, but not pursued further for a number of reasons. The key is that it doesn't address the most congested sections of the scheme, particularly around M11 Junction 13, over Madingley Hill. A couple of photos illustrating some of the constraints that we deal with, particularly around the SSSI and the American Cemetery. Those are the 2 sites dealt with by the letters that are referred to under the Freedom of Information request issue. Those letters have been assessed in full by suitably professional qualified people and reflected in the reports. There is no amendment to be made to the reports we have produced because they reflect those letters. Those letters have been published for some time on the GCP website. So there is no issue, there is no amendment to be made to the work that's done. And I would urge members, we will send a link round to read those letters. There is very clear guidance given from those 2 statutory bodies on the importance of these 2 sites, which are the most environmentally sensitive sites in the area we are considering. And that is what is stressed in those 2 letters. Those are really quite critical to understand. I'll come back to the constraints later, but it's important, if you just look at the photos, to also look at the lines of mature trees along the existing road. Those trees, to use Mr. Littlewood's phrase, would have to be grubbed up and removed, de-rooted, I forget the word, if we were to widen this section of the road. So that is the sort of implication of an online improvement scheme. Just give you one quick cross-section. This is looking at the section by the SSSI and looking at the land basically available between the edge of the SSSI and adjacent properties. And even to fit at a reasonable standard a single inbound public transport lane, we would be starting to encroach on properties or the planting along the SSSI. Clearly, by cutting down the standard of the scheme, we could fit something in, and that's the sort of option that has been looked at. It is a substandard option. It's a very, very short-term bodge is the only word I can use to get something in. It is not an existing standard, it's not acceptable, and that's why, as Peter said earlier, the business case for such an option is poor. Trying to fit in 2 lanes to have a proper high-quality scheme with bus lanes in and out would eat substantially into properties along there, assuming that the SSSI was not to be harmed. So, again, there is no desire to suppress discussion of an online. We simply don't have the land to play with along this corridor, and that's physically a constraint we have to work within. In terms of the route proposal as it is, you've seen the fly-through of the scheme, you've seen the indicative bus stop locations. As, again, Peter has said, these are indicative. This is a proposed route to agree a route in order to start the process of further design work, full environmental impact appraisal, development of mitigation measures. So that would be the next stage of the work. I'll take you very quickly through those sections, but I'm aware that maybe members would wish to go back to some of those detailed sections in due course. So the Cambourne area of the scheme, as has been discussed previously, would be online. I think in the context of the announcement of East-West Rail, we are very mindful there is a huge opportunity to create a new interchange with the proposed station. That's likely to be out of town, and the reference that's been made to last mile services will be about getting people from Cambourne, from Bourne Airfield and places like that, out to the station. Conversely, people coming in perhaps to West Cambridge who would alight at the new Cambourne station and use our proposed service to get to West Cambridge. The East-West Rail will not be serving Bourne Airfield. It will not be serving West Cambridge. Those are simply the facts of the matter. And so that's what we really refer to when we talk about the last mile connectivity. We've also talked with the Town Council in Cambourne about a potential travel hub in the town centre. That is also to be considered, but in the light of the East-West Rail announcement, clearly we will be rethinking how we consider arrangements within Cambourne itself. Bourne Airfield, the corridor, as everybody I think is aware, was defined in a supplementary planning document. That's been approved, and we would effectively work in line with South Cambridgeshire and the developers to comply with the wider requirements of that, and we'd fit within that. You saw that in the fly-through, an illustration of a bus stop. There is various additional documentation available, which I'm not going to dwell on given the time available to us. Scotland Farm Park and Ride site. The selection, I would have to say, of the site, we found there was quite a strong balance between this and the waterworks. Very, very strong representation made by the local liaison forum. We have taken those views on board, and as we have with a number of aspects of the scheme, we have modified some of our thinking and opted for Scotland Farm. I would have to say is possibly less convenient in public transport terms, but we understand some of the environmental concerns. It's also worth saying that within Dry Drayton, there's quite strong concern from the parish council there, and we will be looking at traffic calming measures in Dry Drayton and improvements for pedestrian cycle access to the park and ride site in order to ensure people in Dry Drayton at least get the best deal they can from that. Again, issues raised in one of our many meetings with parish councils, listening to what we've been told by local people are their concerns. And we in that instance, reflect the fact they personally would not like to see this site, but we will try and pick up some of the issues they've raised. St Neots Road, the road carries on off-road in parallel, mainly to the St Neots Road. We are acutely aware of the loss of trees and vegetation. We would comment a lot of those are not that mature. Many are associated with replanting along the A428 works, but we do note the very strong concerns and strongly expressed concerns about the loss of that. In terms of the wider environmental impact, anybody who's actually been out on that road will have seen the challenges with traffic noise. And as we have said on a number of occasions, we would look to, for example, improvement and replacement of the existing noise barriers so that current levels of traffic noise, which are significant, could be reduced. The impact of our scheme will be extremely modest compared to the very substantial problems which I agree residents in that section of road are already facing. So there is hopefully an opportunity for betterment in that context. Here's just one example of a cross-section. we're not pulling punches on this. There is a significant loss of vegetation. As we referred to, actually, I think by the chair of the LF, as we referred to previously, we will be looking at a net biodiversity gain across the scheme. So across the whole of the scheme, there will be an increase overall in planting. We cannot deny that there will be, in this particular location, a loss of planting. The Coton area, we have been having discussions with CPPF, the National Trust and others. There is ongoing discussion about the details of this alignment, and those will continue to try and look at how we can best mitigate the impacts and the impact on the environment. We have already agreed to move the scheme further away from Coton, particularly on the Cambridge Road, so around 40 to 50 metres away now from the nearest houses. And that refinement, the development of mitigation measures will continue. Where there are pockets of land possibly severed, we will look at the opportunities to create, for example, new wildlife habitats, replacing what, again, at the moment is often heavily agricultural land, which has modest value. It is possible to actually improve the quality of much of that land. Here, again, just a very typical cross-section I'll pass over, but giving an idea, this is the sort of distance we're talking about from the nearest property, despite some concerns which have been expressed previously about earlier iterations. That's the sort of distance we're now talking about. West Cambridge, again, changes made to the scheme, talking to the university about the alignment, which would have originally gone to the south side of the development. The intention now is to go along Charles Babbage Road. There's still discussion ongoing with West Cambridge about the arrangements for that, but the principle of that would be shared space in order to give best access to the university site and also avoid impacts along the north side of the Westfields and the south side of the development. And then finally, Adams Road, which obviously has been discussed at some length already. The broad reasons for the changes, primarily the impact on the greenbelt in the Westfields. Members may recall we were instructed by the Executive Board around a year ago that we should go and re-look in more detail at some of the impacts of the proposed scheme. We did that. That's what has impacted on some of our thinking now. Landowner access issues, having further discussion also with stakeholders along the scheme, have identified a range of other issues, none of which are showstoppers, but a number of which do complicate the Rifle Road range arrangements, and the issue around the cost savings and future-proofing associated with the fact that if the CAM scheme comes along with portals towards the West Cambridge site, whatever we construct east of there does effectively become redundant. Improved access to Adams Road would create a link that would actually be eventually potentially a high-quality cycle route. The creation of the busway around the rifle range would largely be redundant infrastructure. There are alternate cycle links. We are aware that the Adams Road Borrows Walk link will remain the primary cycle route in from this location, but the provision of improvements to Madingley Road will also provide an improved cycle link from West Cambridge to the north, and we would intend to provide a additional non-motorised user path down through the rifle range as part of the wider Commonton Greenway package, so those going to the south of Cambridge would have an alternative. There are ongoing discussions. We note the input to this from CamCycle. We are talking to CamCycle and others around the layouts, for example, the Wilberforce Road junction, which is already deeply unsatisfactory and requires improvement. We've looked at issues such as air quality. There is very little of a problem at the moment. There would be negligible impact of the proposed scheme. So those issues have been looked at provisionally, and as we've said already, will be covered under a full environmental impact assessment. That brings me on to the inset assessment. The process of doing this sort of assessment is defined by the Department for Transport. They have a tool which is called their early appraisal sifting tool. An inset effectively is an adaptation of that tool. It's a very similar type of tool. It is a fairly simple multi-criteria assessment. A number of questions have been raised about some of the detailed scores. We'll be happy to go through some of those in greater detail at another occasion.
Safety. Be quiet, please.
So, for example, if we take safety, we have already had suitably qualified ROSPA-trained road safety experts look at the location. They've looked at both the Rifle Range and Adams Road, and I would have to say there, although we've given equivalent scores to both layouts, they've actually expressed significant concerns about the Rifle Range as a layout, where they see the safety of buses turning out of that as being highly undesirable. I wouldn't presume to change the scores and rate the Rifle Range worse at this point in time. I think that might be rather inopportune, but I can assure the chair members that we've already had an initial assessment undertaken by ROSPA-trained experts. A full road safety audit will be undertaken by independent road safety auditors as the scheme proceeds. So the issues of safety, for example, are not taken lightly and will not be taken lightly. In terms of, for example, journey time reliability, the scores for Adams Road have not been changed, but a range of access issues have been identified along the Rifle Range, which was originally given an extremely strong score. Retrospectively, maybe that was optimistic. It did at the time appear to be highly attractive, but having identified a number of rights of access which include agricultural vehicles, there is a significant risk, for example, that if access arrangements for farms served along that area were to change, we could find regular agricultural vehicle access along the route, which would be extremely problematic. And those are the sorts of issues which have been reflected and, as I say, could be dealt with in greater detail on another occasion, if that is helpful. Just a very quick indicative section along Adams Road. Environmental considerations, so mindful of the time, Chair, but this is an issue a lot of people express concerns around. There's a commitment in line with what is also desirable for CAM for electric vehicles at the earliest opportunity, but as a minimum, the use of Euro 6 standards, which is a level of air quality emissions acceptable in most air quality zones. So a very low level of emissions of particulate matter, nitrous oxides, for example. I've covered the biodiversity net gain issues. There have been significant environmental surveys and assessments already undertaken. Many of those are available on the GCP website, so that information is in the public arena and that work will continue. It feeds the assessment that has already been undertaken and it informs the work we've done to date and will finally feed into the environmental impact assessment. I think I'll probably leave those issues there. Bus destinations, I think, again, Peter has responded to questions on those. There is a bus strategy that's been developed. It reflects existing operating patterns, the emerging city centre strategy, but also some of the opportunities from this and other GCP schemes. The intention has always been and is to serve a variety of destinations. The city centre, the station, CBC, Science Park. It's important to say ultimate bus frequencies will be driven by commercial operators unless the Mayor chooses to take up the franchise powers which are available to him. So at this point in time, GCP cannot dictate bus frequencies, but suitably experienced public transport experts have looked at the potential, spoken to operators, and this we think is a realistic level of bus service with around 10 buses per hour on most sections of the route in either direction. In terms of scheme benefits, I think we've alluded to previously, the AM inbound journey times would reduce from around 50 minutes in the Dooman to about 31 minutes. The demand for travel would go up significantly, creating capacity with around 10 buses each way in the order of around 1,500, which is a significant increase on capacity, but also hopefully increase in due course in take-up. In terms of the economic benefits, the basic transport benefit case is relatively low, as has been commented on. The reason that city deal funds have been created is that conventional transport assessments are about dealing with transport problems. City deal deals with the opportunities of growth, and the opportunities of growth provide significant land value uplift benefits and also additional GVA growth associated with some of the other economic activity associated with that. So when you actually look at the impact on the local economy, the benefit cost ratio will be about 3.5. that's looking at the wider economic growth to the area, not just the transport growth as a whole. Again, we could talk for hours about this, but I suspect you would prefer me to proceed. So I'll let Laura talk quickly about stakeholder engagement that has been undertaken so far on the scheme.
So I'm part of the communications team, and I'd just like to say a very brief word on what has been a huge part of the scheme to date. Everyone who's involved in the project spends a great deal of time speaking with local communities, businesses and landowners and other key stakeholder groups. The local liaison forum, some examples of that would be that the local liaison forum was formed in 2015, and there have been a number of local liaison forum meetings, as you've heard today. Over the last 18 months, there have been 11 technical group workshops, which is a subgroup of the local liaison forum. And those workshops have discussed at length subjects of key interest to the technical group members. We contribute regularly to, and I should say that all the correspondence, we obviously correspond regularly with the local liaison forum, respond to resolutions, and you can see all of that correspondence online on the website, including correspondence relating to Mr. Tomlinson's issue. We regularly contribute to agendas at local council meetings and committees. Very often we proactively make those offers, and we host specific meetings on subjects of interest in particular communities. So we've recently been setting up a number of meetings and events with the Northern Union Residents Association regarding Adams Road, of course. There's a regular flow of correspondence into the project's mailbox and through the project manager. And we have regular meetings with landowners and various representatives of land ownership. There are also two working groups that are comprised of statutory stakeholder groups that include Cambridge Past, Present and Future, the National Trust, British Horse Society and Cam Cycle. And so they're engaged throughout the course of the scheme on updates, and early designs are shared. And those groups have come up with scheme design principles that, dependent on the board's decision, would frame design going forward. There would be, again, depending on the board's decision, there would be another opportunity to engage as part of a public consultation once a full environmental impact assessment was undertaken. And as a final point, I'd just like to echo Peter's point that consultation responses are built into the plans wherever possible. Feedback is reflected in scheme designs, and the consultation responses don't demonstrate that communities have rejected the scheme. I said that we've spoken, the project team speak to hundreds of people across the route, and they express a range of views. But for those who are keen to see the scheme in operation, those would most commonly be represented by people who are working, who have to experience the lengthy bus commutes at the moment, those who have young families, those who are students, or those who do or would like to cycle more often. So I just wanted to represent that's the kind of views that would be most commonly expressed by those who are have enthusiasm for the scheme.
So just very quickly to run through the next steps, subject to Executive Board approval. We've talked about the environmental impact assessment. That is the next stage. So we would first need to agree the scope of that with the Department for Transport. Data collection is ongoing because various species have to be surveyed at particular times of year, but that would be completed. And as part of that, we would then lead into, as we've said, the refinement of the design and the mitigation measures. So various opportunities, talking, for example, with landowners about some of the details of how that would go forward. Having completed that process, there will be a further round of consultation. We are mindful we have local elections coming up, so in advance of the PERDA period, we will be starting to talk to selected stakeholders, typically landowners, statutory consultees, but the length of time we need for a formal consultation would have to wait until after PERDA, and so we will then do a wider consultation process then where we can allow enough time that the due process can be completed. The intention then is to submit a Transport and Works Act order. That would be effectively the planning application for the scheme. The Transport Works Act is the legislation to be used, and the aim is to get that done by the ending of the year. The timing thereafter depends on the Department for Transport and the Planning Inspectorate, and the process is that they have to go through, but with intention to have a scheme that we can open in late 2024. So Thank you for your time, Chair, and we're happy to obviously take any questions.
No, thank you very much for that. Now, members, this is a huge item, and in the hope of attempting to structure it a little bit, I'm proposing to take the route section by section, and bear in mind that we can't address very fine tuning of the design. That is something to happen in the next stage, and the Transport Director will tick me off every time we stray from that rubric. So I'm proposing to take it section by section in accordance with pages 133 and following, and then after we've dealt with it section by section, I'm proposing to have to allow any discussions of a general nature, and then we will, however the debate unfolds, we will draw things to a conclusion that way. So I'll start on page 133 with the Cambourne end of the scheme. Does anyone have anything to say in relation to page 133, or any issues arising from the Cambourne element? The Bourne Airfield element section? Right then, so that brings us to Scotland Farm and Hardwick. Anyone have anything to ask about Scotland Farm and Hardwick? No, no one on Scotland Farm and Hardwick.
Sorry, Heather over there.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Yes, right then, Councillor Heather Williams. Yeah.
Thank you. It might be more comments than questions, so rule me out of order if accordingly. So we're about to find out if it's a benefit or a loss, in that this is my first time on the Assembly with this, so I don't come with any of the experience that others have before. But this section puzzles me in that we're going to the north of the A428 for the Park and Ride site, and then we're coming back to the south. Now, 1.7 miles of trees, and we are aware that there's some mature oak trees, and we know that trees need to be a certain age before they're of optimum use to us and everything else. I appreciate what you're saying about the business case, but it's very difficult here to understand why, being the other side, it has no impact on Bourne Airfield. I know the argument was given that Bourne Airfield is the SPD's requirement, but it doesn't say it has to be a southern route. And I was present at the LLF, and I think it's the principle of this off-road, on-road, whichever it may be, the principle of the connection, I don't think it is widely supported. But I think it's the process of where it's going, and this area is one of those in particular where the change for it being north of the A428 would make an incredible impact. And earlier on in our documents, on page 26, it says that as a GCP, you can do things that aren't yet commercially viable. So I appreciate there is a business case to it, but I just think that there's more can be done here, and we are asking residents to have this. I think it will be a benefit when it's put in place. I have concerns that this has been going on some time, and it's obvious it's a bit of a pressure cooker agenda item on both sides. But there's a danger that if just because of wanting to get something done, get something across the line, because it's been going on, that sometimes you can make a bad decision with good meaning. And this section, I think, is one of those where potentially it could be worked out more. It may be more difficult. I'm sure I'm going to be told it's more difficult to go over the other side, but sometimes the difficult choice is the right choice. So I am very concerned about the loss of trees here, and how many trees is it that we'll be losing, and how many more trees are we planting? Because I appreciate the biodiversity net gain, that there's all sorts of ways that can be calculated. It's not necessarily actually in trees. So I think it's very difficult to judge this section without knowing those environmental results. I'd normally want to see the environmental impact, not a full assessment, not as detailed, but something on the route options this side of it rather than the latter makes it very difficult to judge.
Thank you very much. Anyone else on St Neots Road, Scotland Farm and Hardwick? And I'll gather comments and questions on each section, and then I'll ask the Transport Director to respond. So, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I attended the site visit to look at this route, and I was quite shocked at the noise along that stretch of road already from the A428. And I understand, I accept that there would be new noise barriers, but would there, if this part of the scheme was accepted, would there be other mitigation measures for the people living in those houses, such as actual triple glazing, other things that could be done to their houses? Because it is already very, very noisy, and I found that level of noise quite unacceptable already.
Thank you. Anyone else on similar geography? So could we have some answers on those questions, please?
Thank you. So just picking up the questions in order. The issue about why to the south rather than the north, as Laura alluded to earlier, there is, across Hardwick, actually quite strong support for the scheme. There are a lot of people who would use this as a mechanism for commuting to work, ordinary people who go to ordinary jobs, schools, places like that. It does actually offer value. If we take it to the north, it doesn't serve Hardwick. It goes to the countryside because you'd be the other side of the A428. The other issue, which we then pick up environmentally as we go further along, if we stay to the north, and this links into the Girton issue as well, is we then hit the thorny issue of Madingley Hall as well, and potential impacts there. So there are a couple of different issues that become problematic staying to the north. But the main issue is actually the purpose of the scheme really is to provide public transport access for people, and that is important. In terms of the issue of trees, yes, we understand the concerns there. I think the numbers and the extent need to be clarified, and as we go through the design process, that will be lots of numbers have been bandied around, lots of discussion about what's there. Our responsibility is to do a full eco-assessment of those trees, work out what actually is going to be lost. That will need to be quantified. There will then need to be further discussion about reinstatement, and as you say, net biodiversity, again, you're absolutely right, can mean multiple things. We may need to make clear commitment about planting. What I would say is quite a lot of the planting there, a lot of it is planting that came in after the A428 went in. So lots of it is more attractive than not having anything there, and that's indisputable, but it's not necessarily all mature. And I would highlight that again, the sections of Madingley Road, which a lot of people are very keen to see a bus lane on, we would be clearing much older, much more mature trees. So again, I think a lot of the trees that will be lost are relatively immature, but we totally understand that point, and that's an important one we will need to come back to, definitely. The issue of noise, yes, clearly it's a very difficult situation. So I have huge sympathy with the people living there at the moment, but I think the existing situation is pretty intolerable. We would be looking to put in noise insolution barriers to reduce the overall levels of noise. I don't think I can comment on double glazing, and there may indeed, generally the what is defined in terms of compensation for that is quite clearly set out. We will be looking at reducing, not increasing traffic noise. I can't comment on what arrangements were made. I would have thought when the A428 went in that double glazing was provided, but I wouldn't be aware of that. But certainly we will be looking to put in improved barriers because the existing situation is very poor. That said, the impact of our scheme, I think, on noise would be negligible. We'd be talking about a very small number of vehicles. The St Neots Road itself carries quite significant amounts of traffic, let alone the A428, which in places is elevated as well.
Right, thank you very much. So that brings us to Coton. Any questions specific to Coton? No. Was that on Coton? You just wanted to be ahead of the game on West Cambridge. All right. Councillor John Williams, West Cambridge.
Thank you. Well, if I draw your attention, and this has been mentioned by Peter, paragraph 3.4 on page 109, we talk about this being in line with the adopted local plans for South Cambridgeshire and the city. The actual local plan for South Cambridgeshire in regard to provision for Bourne Airfield says that a requirement is the provision of a high-quality bus priority measure or busway or on or parallel to the A1303 between its junction with the A428 and Queen's Road, Cambridge. Now, I have declared an interest here. I am a regular user of the Stagecoach number City 4, the X5 and the Whippet X3. And I can assure you that the congestion isn't just on Maddenley Hill. A considerable amount of congestion between West Cambridge and Queen's Road. And the question I ask is, obviously, none of the interestingly enough, people who are promoting an on-road solution don't seem to go east of West Cambridge. So is it possible to have segregated high-quality bus priority between West Cambridge and Queen's Road on the A1303? And secondly, the proposed busway only goes to Grange Road. It doesn't go to Queen's Road. And the stipulation in the local plan is that the bus priorities or busway should go to Queen's Road. And interestingly, the busway bit was put in by the planning inspector. It wasn't the original South Cambs condition didn't include busway. That was put in by the planning inspector when she came back with her main matters in August 2018. But it's quite clear that the priority measures or the busway should go to Queen's Road, and I'd like to know what provision you're going to make from Grange Road to Queen's Road to comply with this, with the local plan.
Yes, thank you very much. Councillor Bick.
So you're taking any questions about Adams Road here as well?
Yes, Adams Road is included in the West Cambridge page.
Well, I have some concerns about the Adams Road proposition, in particular the relative to the illustration that was shown rather quickly on the slides, actually, but I think I just caught it. And I mean, I don't. Yeah, was that it? That's it. Yeah. Now, I've heard that we can't expect a detailed design at this stage, and it's all about an alignment. But if there's a feature of the alignment that causes us to have a problem visualizing something satisfactory emerging, then I think it's kind of, we have a sort of difficulty in focusing on the issue a bit. I mean, I don't want to, I would like to put my concern in proportion here, because the actual cycleway that leads off Adams Road towards the West Cambridge site actually isn't that wide at the moment, but it's also bi-directional cycleway, but it is clearly, as it stands at the moment, protected. And I imagine that that would continue to be segregated if it had a busway beside it. So the question of space for cycles, which numbers grow, I think, as you go then from that cycleway onto Adams Road, becomes one for me more about the proposition that you can protect it just with advisory cycle markings on the road inside a road which isn't wide enough to take the vehicles that will come along there in two directions. And I mean, what I am really asking for is that the board provides and seeks, when it meets, for significantly more reassurance that there can be a better solution so far as the cycles are concerned along there. I mean, I'm trying to visualize the occasions that buses come from both directions along that stretch. I mean, you can say it won't be very often, but it will happen. Or it could be a bus and another vehicle as well, I believe. So what actually happens, because of the actual volume of cycles, and if they only have the protection of an advisory cycle path. It just seems to me, what actually happens there? Do the buses reverse out of Adams Road? I don't see how that happens. Do they just stop until there is a break in the large number of cycles? And I just think that we need to understand a bit more about the traffic management possibilities here that could make this okay. I don't want to provoke a re-evaluation of the comparisons between this and the rifle range track at the moment, but I do want to understand that this would be okay, and I have some significant concerns about what looks to me possible at the moment. But again, I don't want to say I can do the job of the transport planners, so I think it's reassurance from traffic management point of view, because I'm not a big critic of the overall alignment, and I don't want that to become the issue as far as I'm concerned, but I would like to see something reassuring, not only me, but I think many other people as far as Adams Road is concerned.
Thank you very much. Councillor Heather Williams, and then you.
Thank you. I did actually have my hand up for Coton, so
I'm so sorry.
I got bypassed.
I'm so sorry, I didn't see
Would you
at all.
indulge in allowing me to go back a stage?
I will, of course, allow you to go back to
Thank you very much,
Coton.
Chairman.
Yes.
Just some clarification of the officers with this route, in that it was, I think I noted your remarks, that it's agricultural land of a modest value. It's actually green belt that it's going through, and appropriateness development in the green belt is never, it might be a modest value in economic terms, but it's definitely not, from my experience on planning, at all. It's a serious issue when going through green belt, because again there's environmental issues. So I'm clarifying that you mean modest value financially and not in environmentally. And I'm just looking along the alignment, and a lot of other countries, China and other places, really focus on the multimodal corridors, which reduces planning blight, which actually reduces the environmental impacts of things. And just, obviously you're going to have to put a robust case in, because you're going to have, I know you're not coming to this planning committee, or South Cambs planning committee, but you will be going through the planning process. And so I was a bit alarmed by that approach, about it not having much value, to be honest. And is there a specific reason why we can't go to one of less? And again, we need these environmental impacts before making these decisions. It's really, really difficult as it stands. Sorry.
Can we have an immediate answer to the Coton question? Because
if that's
I'm really sorry.
written, we will redraft. Pardon?
So just to clarify, the green belt is a very important planning term. It's not an environmental term. The question was, I think it was responding to actually a point you made about net biodiversity gain, and comment in places some of the fields are.
You certainly can, yes.
What I was referring to is you said about agricultural land of modest value, whether you meant monetary value, because I consider it green belt very valuable. And the other issue was about going multimodal in creating corridors. So rather than going through Greenbelt, through countryside, that you would be able to have more environmentally... the issue for me is you're chopping great chunks through the Greenbelt. I know we're worried at the Greenbelt when it gets to the rifles range, but we don't seem to be too concerned here. I'm just saying it's modest value. So I'm hoping that's not the approach, but can you clarify what is, please?
So that's not the approach. And so going back to original answer, if we've not brought out the green belt issue at that location, we will, because we recognise it and we recognise the status that it is afforded. This whole, whilst the focus of the conversation thus far has been on public transport, we are looking at multimodal approach because we're looking at walking and cycling as segregated routes alongside. So that is included in the proposal that's put forward. So that would address the multimodal issue that you've raised.
That's a very helpful question, Councillor Williams. Back to West Cambridge then. Anyone else want to speak about West Cambridge? Yes, Councillor Massey. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. Going back again to Adams Road, I think we do have to bear in mind there has been a petition with 3,000 signatures, and we also have to bear in mind the comments from CamCycle. very much so. We have prioritised in this assembly before pedestrians and cyclists and public transport in that order-ish, pedestrian and cyclists equal. But we don't seem to be doing that on Adams Road. So I think there is significant concerns about cycling safety on that stretch there. And like Tim and Councillor Bick, I would like to have further reassurance, and I'm pretty sure the board would like to have further reassurance and try to ensure segregated cycle lanes where possible to keep the safety of our cyclists at all times, and potentially phased flow of buses and consideration to other car reduction measures to make that stretch of road a lot safer than it will be.
Yes, Councillor Wilson, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Just to reiterate about this, I would have liked to have seen segregated cycle lanes, but if that's not possible, if these are electric buses, I would like some reassurance that cyclists will be able to hear those buses, or that that they're aware of what's going on, what traffic is going around them.
Thank you very much. Alan Valentine.
Also speaking in relation to Adams Road, I'm a keen cyclist. I certainly would be opposed to any notion that we would be adding buses into the existing mix along that road, but we're not. We're proposing to remove all of the car parking. I've used several times the analogy, an example of Nightingale Avenue, where at the moment, because of the Fendon Road roundabout, we've removed car parking, and there is now a mix of cars and cyclists and buses, and it is much safer for cyclists now that the parked cars have been removed. So it seems to me that we're making a big improvement by removing car parking, and I would hope that the mix of buses, which actually are quite difficult to miss because they're rather large, and cyclists would be safe. I too would support any further reductions that we could make to cars along that road as part of the mix, but it seems to me overall there would be a kind of net improvement in the safety situation.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah, I just want to make some comments on the Adams Road and the rifle range route. I'm not really convinced that the debate is over about the choice of the route. I must admit, I was greatly disappointed when I got information that the rifle range route had been dropped in favour of the Adams Road route. And although we were given some explanation there, I'm still not convinced. I was looking at, we can't avoid the fact that there are so many cyclists using Adams Road now. I mean, it is what one would call a very successful example of people getting round Cambridge without using a car. And it just seems to be a pity that we're in a situation where we're trying to encourage a modal shift, and we've got two of the elements that make up the modal shift, cycling and public transport, buses, being put into a kind of competition with each other, whereas in fact, they are the complementary, good, healthy ways of travelling around versus people clogging up our streets, congestion and pollution and so on with the cars. So there were a couple of reassuring statements made about, mitigating the possible decision to go down Adams Road, because I don't think it's signed and sealed yet, is it? The Adams Road route? No, good. Because, I mean, one of the reasons that was given about a possible drawback for the rifle range route was the interference with the movements of agricultural vehicles. And I was just thinking to myself, when you mentioned that, well, the loss of the
the safe cycling, although it's not that safe going down Adams Road with the parked cars, but would be putting an improved, a cycle track down the rifle range route. But then, aren't you going to have your agricultural vehicles interfering with the safe passageway of cyclists going down this proposed mitigating cycleway? I mean, that's worth keeping in mind. So, as I say, I'm just not convinced by the plans at this stage, and I can't, for what you're saying about Adams Road. There was also, it hasn't come into the debate today, and I didn't have time to print out the correspondence, but there was a resident who actually sent his plans for a kind of one-way system. Buses coming in from the west, going down to Grange Road, and then exiting towards the west in a one-way manner rather than two-way. And I think Councillor Bix said you were going to approach Peter about having an assessment of that. I'm sure I saw that in my many emails, and I was just wondering if there has been time for that assessment to be done, because it seemed like a little bit of imaginative thinking with this problem, which is worth looking at and might address a lot of the concerns. And just to sum up, I think one of the key elements that we must have in whatever we do in directing the cyclists is to have them on segregated routes. We've got successful segregated routes already developed, Huntington Road, Hills Road, and we've had in Hills Road, it's been demonstrated statistically a huge increase in the number of cyclists using those routes. So let's just have more of those. And then, if possible, when you take out the parked vehicles on Adams Road, put in segregated cycle routes to make it actually safer for those cyclists going down there.
Thank you very much. Right. Anyone else on the West Cambridge section, Adams Road in particular? I'm going to flag up this table again of the before and after inset values. We had some treatment of some of the changes. Is anyone anxious to hear specific information relating to any other changes in any of that scoring? No? Okay. So that brings us, as far as I can see, to the general discussion of the principle of the route of the scheme. Oh, I'm so sorry, Peter. Yes, I didn't allow you to answer the West Cambridge observations and questions. I'm so sorry. I'm jumping ahead of myself.
Could you turn your light off?
Oh. Thank you, Chair. So just in terms of some of the comments raised, in terms of Queen's Road, we're not looking for a segregated solution to Queen's Road. That was never part of the plan. What we're looking at is delivering elements of segregation along the route, which will overall significantly reduce journey time. There may well be further priority measures in the city itself, and that would link with the city access report and others. We're doing a signals review in terms of giving bus further priorities there. So that's how we would deal with the sort of the inner city element of it. Electric buses, there's already work in Transport for London in terms of retrofitting, and I think it's highly likely the regulations will change to actually make electric buses noisy, which feels a little bit perverse, but it does respond to a sort of safety concern. Adams Road, what we've put out is an indicative design, and we recognise this conversation needs to take place and needs to continue around what else could we do in that area. There's no suggestion the speeds will change, already 20 miles an hour, there's no suggestion that will go up. We will continue to look at traffic management proposals and what's the best way of using that space. What we are not going to do is to produce a final detailed design on this element of the scheme in advance of the route alignment decision. because the process that we follow with Department for Transport is you get the route alignment and then you continue through that detailed design process. So the conversations will take place. There are things that we can do around traffic management, and we understand that, and we've done this to stimulate the discussion and conversations with local groups and elected representatives.
And the suggestion that Noel touched on about a one-way system for buses, in fact, I think I recall two variations on one-way system for buses using Adams Road and Wilberforce Road. Are you able to?
And without wishing to mislead or any, that would be a traffic management solution that could be considered on the boundaries of the existing public highway. But again, hesitant that I'm not leading someone to, that's what we'll end up doing and this would all be fine. That is a consideration that needs to go through due process, road safety assessment and all the other things we would do.
Right.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Can I just come back on that? Because I think the request is not that you do a traffic management design at the same time as agree the alignment. It is that you share enough of the potential options for a traffic management design to allay the fears that what was on the picture is really what's likely to happen. I think for a lot of people it is quite a significant issue that influences their view about the scheme. And I think there needs to be more confidence that this will turn out okay before an alignment gets approved.
So I accept that. We will take that away in terms of what else we can do. My just hesitancy is that requires more work that will naturally follow in terms of this decision, and things that we put out now will need to go through due process. So I don't want an accusation of mis-selling because we write something down now or we draw a design now. There's a process to go through. There are more things we can do in traffic management, and we will take on board the challenge to try and bring that further to life between now and the executive board.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So, as we were, or at least as I was, and no one else was, but the overall principle of the scheme, the strategic case, and in fact all the elements of the outline business case. Yes, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Taking on board lots of the comments we've had from the public today and just reflecting on some of the conversations in the presentation that we've seen, I kind of come to the view that...
Close to the microphone, please. Yeah, yeah.
So taking on board some of the public comments and questions today and reflecting on the conversation we've just had and the presentations that we've just had, I'm still broadly supportive of this preferred route. I think for those who would benefit from it, it is doing what the GCP is asking it to do. I think there's a few things that have come out of the conversation so far. One of those is that need to demonstrate the overall benefits. So Laura mentioned some of those parties who really would benefit perhaps not being represented, and perhaps for the board meeting there's a need to draw some of those consultation comments out. And then the other key thing that comes out for me is that some key principles need to be worked into the brief for any design moving forward. So there's a commitment to, for example, barriers in the Hardwick area. There's a commitment to looking at bunding in Coton. So what are those key principles that really ought to be written into the further design brief to ensure that we are addressing all the concerns of all the different parties?
Thank you very much. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I'm rather disappointed that we haven't heard any voices from Cambourne today, because can we assume that because we haven't heard any objections that people are in favour? How far were they involved in the local liaison forum? Did they have representatives there? One of the things that I have read in media is that Cambourne Village College would really like to see this happen as soon as possible because of the educational choices that the students make when going on to sixth form. That at the moment they travel 3 hours a day to get to sixth forms in Cambridge. So I would have liked to have heard a bit more about what consultation has taken place within Cambourne and with establishments like Cambourne Village College.
Thank you very much. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you. So, as you are probably aware, I am a local councillor representing one of the villages, Coton. Is that better? But I'm on the GCP as the representative of South Cambs District Council, and I am interested in what people in Cambourne care about. As some of you are aware, I stood in the recent general election and spoke to many people in Cambourne about the transport issues that they face. If you will indulge me slightly, Chair, given that I am one of the local councillors, you know, Cambourne does need a better service, absolutely needs a better service. But fundamentally, I think that we can do better than this scheme. And I chime in with Councillor Heather Williams' comments as a new addition to the Assembly, that is there a time pressure here that's just forced us down a path? You know, the fundamental problem is congestion in the city and congestion on Madingley Hill. Now, the solution, let's put the congestion in the city to one side, because I mean, we talked a bit about that this morning with the city access stuff. On Madingley Hill, you know, frankly, to all outsiders, it's absurd that there isn't a link between the A428 and the M11 heading south. It's just absurd. Now, I know that isn't a GCP responsibility. It's Highways England. It doesn't meet their thresholds. Peter's taken me through the arguments before. But it's that lack of joined-up thinking that drives the public absolutely mad. So we're faced with this problem that is not of our making, but so our first solution isn't to tackle the congestion on Madingley Hill. Our solution is to bypass it. And so we're not dealing with the fundamental problem, or even attempting to. We're just attempting to get around it. And that I find that quite disappointing. We talked about in the city access stuff about dealing with congestion in the city, about the potential for car-free days. We're being much more creative around the city, solving congestion in the city. Why not? Why does that not extend to the villages? And it's not just at Madingley Hill. It is other villages on the fringes of Cambridge, which we seem to say, suck it up. Suck up this congestion, or have a bypass put through your village. It's disappointing that that's our solution. And you end up with a situation where outside Hardwick, you've got 8 lanes of the potential for 8 lanes of traffic alongside a rural village. Yes, there is already an impact from the A4 to 8. This has the potential to reduce the noise. There is still going to be the visual impact of 8 lanes outside those people's houses. So just would recap, you know, or question, how did we end up here? Yeah, in any good process, and we talk, or I raised this particularly in the city access, and I didn't raise it knowing that I was going to raise it again here, around, let's see some good winning alternatives that we can see the trade-offs. In any good decision process, you have to have choices that are viable. But where any of those decisions could be a winner. But with this, it seems to me, looking back, the winner was chosen early on, and we've only ever seen variations on that theme. I've looked at the technical notes that looked at the northern route all the way up to Girton. It was never consulted on. It may have been ruled out for good reasons early on. But the only consultation, the only route that did go north around the American cemetery that was consulted on with the public was quite frankly an absurd route that basically almost cut through the SSSI and came down very tightly to use the existing road bridge. Why was there no alternative? Given that we have an alternative to the south of the A1303 that builds a new bridge, why was there no alternative ever looked at that had its own bridge going into Eddington as an alternative way into the city? It may be that it wouldn't have won. It may be that when you did your options analysis, it wouldn't have won. But I come back to it. We have the decision was taken fairly early on that, in principle, a segregated route was best. It chimed with the local plan. We haven't ever had a clear choice of different routes. Now, the mayor actually, with the Arup report, did look at a route that went into Eddington, and there was very little. There was actually in the public report there was very little information on that. It looked like it potentially it didn't look as good according to that analysis, but it was a very high level analysis, and in terms of the ranges, it could have been competitive, and it had never been worked up. So even knowing that, okay, on roads never going to work, at least in the GCP officer's view, we've kept going with trying to build up the evidence around the on-road rather than seek a genuine choice of a different route, which just seems bizarre to me. And so we had a situation where it built up bad faith that in the consultation where we had the three routes, we had two on road and one off-road. Combined, the two on-road routes were massively favoured in the consultation. But even in the reports today, we see a comparison of the most favoured on-road route, which was 40%, and on the off-road route, which was 33%. It was misleading, and the process around that leaves a really bad taste in the mouth that we've been left here. You know, not only that, we had the change in frame of the mayor coming along and saying it has to be off-road. So we'd already decided in principle it needed to be off-road, and yet didn't have an alternative on that. But then the mayor said definitively it had to be off-road to be CAM compliant. Again, that would have been a good opportunity to actually properly work up two solutions that were CAM compliant, rather than keep pressing on out of the sense of urgency because we were making a mess of the process anyway. So, in my view, we've had a poor process that's led to a poor scheme. You know, the reason that there's this debate over Adams Road or the rifle range is because fundamentally it's a poor place to come into Cambridge. You know, to me, representing that area, but also as someone who's lived in Cambridge for some time, you know, putting a big infrastructure investment, a big infrastructure scar on a massive great hill in a relatively flat area seems like it would have been worth looking at a genuine alternative to that. And I've already mentioned about the 8 lanes of traffic alongside Hardwick. I'm struggling to understand that. And now in this paper, we compare it not to a genuine alternative, but to the minimum option. Well, big surprise, it performs so much better than doing virtually nothing. You know, that's not a shock. And even on things like, we can't even, on really important aspects of this, it's a very weak commitment on electric buses as soon as we can. There's no time frame assigned to that. So we had lots of positive comments around the city access this morning, and there was a debate around that being the responsibility of the city council. So I mentioned before that this comes in at into the city, and you still get stuck in the congestion. You still get stuck in the city congestion, and that needs to serve other employment sites. So the end point isn't Grange Road. So to make this scheme work, we have to deliver something on the city access. But we don't have any control of that. And it again comes back to this joined up thinking. This scheme has to stand on its own, but we need to consider how it fits certainly with the schemes that we're delivering, never mind East West Rail. And I don't quite accept that the arguments that have been made on East West Rail. There were some comments, I think, on trying to find the paragraph 420 and 421. If I just turn to them, I will read them out. So on 420. It points out that, East West Rail wouldn't serve Bourne Airfield or West Cambridge. Yes, that's obviously true, but the business case for this is based on going not just to West Cambridge. It's to go into the city and to other employment sites of the city that could be accessed by East West Rail. So while the time frames may be different, it seems absurd to suggest in the long term, East West Rail does not have an impact on the business case of this project. Now, and this project is permanent. It's permanent. So if something comes along in the longer term that undermines its business case, it's still there. If let's say we solve city access in such a fantastic way that there would be room on Madingley Hill to operate a really high quality public transport service, then we've just got two roads that come down Madingley Hill, one new one that we've built to no end, and that could be in 15 or 20 years' time. And that kind of long-term thinking, I've talked about joined-up thinking, that kind of long-term thinking and not having that long-term thinking is something else that the public gets annoyed with. So in pure planning terms, yeah, let's get on with it. We've got to do it. It's our job to consider those longer-term contexts. The business case and the guidelines of the Department for Transport, I can't remember exactly the terms you used, Peter, but they purposely don't take into account the other things that might be going on in an area. But that is our job to consider those in making a recommendation. And that applies equally to, at some point down the line, maybe we will finally see the A428 link up with the M11 southbound and help solve that problem on Madingley Hill. So there's a lot of problems with joined-up thinking and process that I think have led to quite a poor outcome. And just in terms of the final part of joined-up thinking, the governance in Cambridgeshire of these types of decisions has got really, really messy. So we had a pause on this scheme, maybe when we could have been looking at alternatives ourselves, while the combined authority worked out whether it fit with CAM. And the statement was made that this proposed route fit with CAM, and the mayor got behind it. But the most recent statement from the mayor, he has changed his mind again, and we're at the whim of the combined authority, it seems. I mean, how can we back this alignment when the authority that is looking after transport policy can't decide whether it fits with their plans? So I'm aware that I may have rambled on somewhat. I apologise to the other members of the Assembly, but I do believe that through a poor process, we've got a poor outcome, and we're not even certain that it fits with transport policy for the area. It's a bit of a mess. I think we could have done a whole lot better. I think we could have done a whole lot better for Cambourne. I think we could have done a whole lot better for the communities along the route.
Thank you, Councillor Solomon. And I have indulged you again because, as you say, you are one of the local members, and I think your views are widely held by many people, and I think the Assembly is grateful to you for articulating them. Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I think to start with Councillor Solomon, glad to have you back on the GCP. Parliament's loss is the GCP's gain. I have got some things to say. I was going to reflect on some things you said and perhaps why we have a different perspective. I agree with you to start with the frustration that we're solving issues which should have been solved 10 or 20 years ago. How we end up with Cambourne with no public transport services is bizarre. It's not the only settlement in that position. So we've been left, we're holding the thing now, and therefore we're going to have to do difficult things. I guess where we differ is from a business perspective, and it's reflected in the Spear report. We need action now, or business growth is going to be constrained. And obviously councillors have to take that much longer term view of what does this mean in the long term. But from a business perspective, it does need a solution. So from a business perspective, we are keen to progress. To go back to my script more carefully. So as a new business representative, but in this case AstraZeneca, we have 3,200 employees now in the Cambridge area, and that number is continuing to grow. As a consequence, and most have come into the area relatively recently, so we have this fairly unhealthy interest in transport and planning, and we analyse the transport needs of our employees quite carefully, and where they go and what they use and how they use it. But I suspect our travel patterns, just like anybody else's, just that we're in the situation we are, so we're spending a lot more time doing than anybody else. So in terms of what we're seeing, what we know is we do first and foremost promote active travel. So any chance to get in cycles or use them from park and ride in any particular way we do. Employees are also very keen on the train. They use the train wherever possible. They like the park and rides. I suspect that's because they have that certainty of an onward from a park and ride journey is generally speaking a bit more reliable than many other forms. But bus usage is almost invisibly small. There's almost no bus usage whatsoever. The only exception to that actually is the guided bus. And we get positive, the only negative feedback we get from the guided bus, which I know doesn't work in, everyone locally hates the guided bus, but if you just come into the area, you don't see that. The only negative feedback from the guided bus is you can't get on a bus because it's too busy. So it's the usage of the bus is the primary concern there. And therefore, I genuinely believe that an on-road solution just will not enable the modal shift that we need. It just will. I'm not seeing it in any of the numbers. I'm not seeing it talking to employees. We need something that's there. So for me, this is really a choice between an off-road solution and doing nothing, and then live with the consequences of that. To soften that slightly to Councillor Solom's, pause and wait for a period of time and see what comes along. Business won't want to do that because that isn't really consistent with how we work. But for us, from a usage perspective, it really is an off-road solution or just pause completely and go back to the drawing board. And that would worry me. It wouldn't stop me doing my job, but it would worry me if the GCP did that. I think, just as an aside, any scheme which was opposed by the American Cemetery we would fundamentally not go with. There's no question that AstraZeneca would go with any scheme which was not supported by the American Cemetery, and that partly reflects the heritage of the organisation. I think a train station at Cambourne could have an impact. I think we do need to look at that. There's something in the document saying that. I think that the impact on that could well reflect actually on the Cam Metro itself. It may actually have to be, on this case, it might be more sensible for the combined authority to decide if they still consider that to be a Cam corridor as a consequence of that. It'll be interesting to see what the business case for the whole Cam Metro is as a consequence of having a train station. I'm not saying that in a doomy sort of way. I'm thinking that's what needs to be done. I think it would be mad just to go forward assuming that everything was the same. It's not. There was a train station at Cambourne, and as I said, our employees will be very much looking forward to a station at Cambourne, presumably in about 10 years, a long way away. And then my final point, although we're not supposed to do specific section, Adams Road, honestly. So the scoring, you know, the scoring system might be right, although there's been some concerns raised on that. But a bit like the park and ride charge, we took away the £1 park and ride charge. That was quite controversial because by taking that away, you theoretically might have some impact on rural bus services. But as a sign, a symbol of that we are going to do something differently and we're going to support sustainable transport, we did it. This is almost like the opposite way around. Adams Road is the second most used cycle route into Cambridge, and just symbolically saying we're now going to convert that into busway, even if we are to put in all the safety measures, it just feels instinctively wrong. From a business perspective, 3.18 versus 2.94 means both scored 3. Okay, that's what I have.
No, thank you very much. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you. So I think we all sympathise with residents, businesses, councillors, everyone that's trying to get their head around the different tiers of local government in Cambridgeshire and who's responsible for transport in particular. So it is difficult. But I think the Mayor's been mentioned, but he did actually come out and said that although we've have in the report saying that we've worked with them and everything else, and this is like the first phase, he came out and said that this will prejudice their plans over the CAM network, and that was obviously circulated to us. And I think that is a concern that about the joined up approach that's being asked for. I think that does make me have reservations on this, because whatever this is, it's a significant amount of money, and we need to make sure that it has a longer term process. So I think that needs to be explored, perhaps before it goes to the board, to see where it is that it's causing issues, and that needs ironing out if it can be. I also would say before it goes through that we really do, there's very little to do with the environmental impacts. I know mentioned it on particular sections, but I think to make these sorts of decisions in this day and age, you need that actually involved. To say that we'll decide it later on, that doesn't wash with myself. I think East West Rail does have an impact. I think now that it's confirmed that it will be at Cambourne, the business case should be relooked at for this proposal. So any onward planning, I think it should be bear in mind. And I think actually that's just good practice. It is a significant change in circumstance. It does feel like a bit of a loaded dice when you read the report of do nothing, and I can understand businesses really wanting this. I think a lot of residents really want a solution to this problem. I think an off-road solution is more favourable than on-road, personally, but I think the off-road solution that has been proposed here, you are never going to keep everyone happy all the time. I appreciate that. But this has created significant upset, and actually I think there has been ways of finding a middle ground that haven't been sought yet. So in its current form, I don't think it is good enough for the residents, and actually as councillors we have a very different perspective to give to business, because we're actually privileged and trusted from residents to be sat here. And I'm from an area which has no influx. I'm on the Hertfordshire border. I'm a complete outsider coming into this, and they're my observations from a very neutral point of view. So they're my conclusions. I think more work can be done, and I think actually there needs to be definitely more environmental assessments and more about the green belt if it is to proceed. But I think actually a solution is needed soon. I just think this needs a little bit more work.
Okay, we've now had 2 references to a recent statement from the Mayor, and I think at this point I'd like to invite Peter, Rachel, either of you, to respond.
Apparently I'm doing it. Thank you, Chair. So I understand there have been sort of recent speculation in the press. What I can confirm is the Combined Authority Board met yesterday. They considered future CAM consultation, which they approved, including the GCP route and the Cambourne to Cambridge as part of the CAM network. So, as I said previously, Combined Authority officers have assisted in the drafting of this report and commented that they are content. So we proceed in alignment with the Combined Authority.
Just to add, we did send that round to Assembly members, but it was quite late yesterday. It was another thing that happened yesterday in terms of the Combined Authority meeting. Letters that have gone out to stakeholders confirming that our routes are phase 1 of CAM and that they won't be reconsulting on our route.
Thank you very much. Councillor Massey.
Yeah, so I just want to go back round again, because I think we have gone round already about the safety aspect of some of the design. We've gone round already about the environmental mitigation. And so the feedback that we've got, particularly on the safety, is that the board has, well, some members of the board have suggested that we would like you to bring back a bit more detail to the board about what other safety aspects you would have in certain areas. And maybe it might be time to think about the environmental aspects of that as well, whether that is possible within the timescale, because I think the board is meeting very soon. 2 weeks? 3 weeks. In regards to East-West Rail, we have known all the options of East-West Rail for some time. We knew all of the options. So I would like to hope that you have worked up, or you have in the past worked up every potential aspect as to what would happen if it was here, what would happen if it went there. Therefore, you already have worked up, I would hope in detail, the Cambourne aspect. And I think there is an element that we have to trust that you have done that. In regards to do nothing, we mentioned tipping point earlier in this meeting. We are in a climate change emergency. We need to get cars off the road. We need to have better transport links for poor people who live in villages who haven't got any transport whatsoever. And we heard of somebody taking, was it 3 hours to get to college? Well, no wonder why college, when I'm talking to different education establishments, college students coming in, they're actually dropping off. You know, their attendance rate is not great. And that is down to transport. In Abbey Wood itself, and this is for a senior school, 1 in 10 students are not attending school because they have to get 2 buses. And this is within the city centre alone. They have to get 2 buses. So therefore, we need to do something now. And so I think if we pause this right now, this has already been 5 years in the making. We are looking at another 5 years before we get to a design stage. We are looking at another 10 to 15 years before we get a solution. And are we going to accept that?
Thank you very much. Councillor Bick.
Well, whilst we're talking about the overall issue, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that I am a supporter of the strategic case for an offline alignment. I have asked and watched and listened carefully over the 5 years to this point, but I have not seen a feasible alternative which would not cause worse environmental impact. And rather like Andy Williams, I think we have other forces at work, the needs of people who aren't already there but are being planned for in housing terms, that we simply have to deliver an excellent solution for. I have entered one point about Adams Road, which I hope doesn't have to become a strategic issue if we can see something that does reassure. I would say that many members of the public weren't here this morning when we were talking about city access and demand management and improved bus services to and inside the city. But there is a relationship, and it is related to that question about what happens when buses get to Grange Road. I don't want to rerun the conversation we had this morning, but if the board are minded to approve the alignment that's in front of us, I think they should be asked, would they please make sure that they are making a response which is no worse on city access than we've asked for this morning, because the moment these two initiatives get detached, I think we cease to have a joined up solution, and I think it's an important linkage that needs to be made both from city access to C2C and from C2C to city access.
Anyone else? Oh yes, Dr. Wells. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly there's a demand emerging for this, and we have been working on it for 5 years, and some solutions. We need to progress to a solution on this. We've heard earlier there is disquiet. It's not a universally popular scheme, but that's not unique to this one. But I think one thing perhaps that we should think about, so I'm going to ask a question to which I have no idea what the answer might be, but it's a process one. It's picking up slightly on Councillor Swan's point about process, but process going forward. It seems to me this project is slightly fraught with an embarrassment of strategic riches. We're worried about a new railway line and a new metro system and how they interface to a new off-road bus solution. There are many cities in this country that would dream of such a richness of options. So it's very unusual, it would seem to me, that we have a scheme here, and this is, I'm not going to say unique, but this I think is quite special amongst the portfolio of our projects, where you've got such a degree of strategic ambiguity around it. So my plea would be that whilst we wish to maintain momentum on a project, how do we build in the process, thought space and flexibility to react and reflect developments on these options as they occur? And, we've got East West Rail, we've got the Cam Metro, we've got the city access, and perhaps we have the A4 to 8 M11 junction, which eventually. But I mean, there are 3 or 4 threads here which could impact this. So it's a process plea about could we have a process that allows those things to have a voice and to be analysed in a way that perhaps if you're in a rather more linear project, you'd say, I've approved this, and now we go off and design it, consult, and build it.
Okay, any more? Right then, well, I haven't had any specific proposals from any members, so I'm just going to sum up the discussion as briefly as I can. Some of these points were answered in the course of the discussion, but I'll just touch on them anyway, just to remind us where we've been, because we have spent quite a lot of time on it. Councillor Heather Williams asked why the route was heading north of the A428, and she was concerned about the loss of trees, especially mature trees. Councillor Wilson had been horrified by the noise from traffic on the A428, which already existed, and was looking forward to betterment in a noise barrier. Councillor John Williams asked whether bus priority could be extended into the city centre, because the local plan had mentioned Queen's Road. Councillor Bick felt that advisory cycle lanes along Adams Road didn't give him sufficient assurance for the safety of cyclists, and that point has been taken up by other members. Councillor Heather Williams again emphasised the value of the multimodal use of corridors, especially in relation to the value of Greenbelt, not its financial value, but its environmental value. Councillor Massey also wished to be assured of traffic management that would assure the safety of cyclists. Councillor Wilson wanted to make sure that if there were any electric buses that they could be heard as they approached from behind. I certainly vouch for that. Helen Valentine felt that removing cars ought to make Adams Road safer for the combination of buses and cyclists, and she cited another road in Cambridge where she had experienced that. Councillor Kavanagh was not persuaded by the relative merits of Adams Road and the rifle range track, and he said, he asked, would agricultural vehicles not interact with cyclists on the rifle range too? Joe Sainsbury suggested that when the paper came to the executive board, there should be more attention to bring out the supportive voices which have been heard during the consultation. Councillor Wilson was a little bit disappointed not to have heard more from representatives of Cambourne, and she cited in particular Cambourne Village College, which felt that this scheme would offer greater educational opportunity to its students. Councillor Solomon repeated his disappointment that we had never been presented with a winnable alternative scheme, and he suggested the route via Eddington could have been a contender if it had been developed. He felt that it had been a poor process leading to a poor outcome. Dr. Williams said that we needed action now. Business can't wait any longer. This has been going on long enough. However, he did feel that the Adams Road finish to the route may send the wrong signals in terms of priorities that the Greater Cambridge Partnership has set for itself. Councillor Heather Williams again said she felt that more work needed to be done, particularly on environmental considerations. She felt that too many people were opposed to this scheme for us to proceed with it. On the other hand, Councillor Massey felt that we couldn't hold off any longer, although she too wished to have safety and environmental considerations refined by the time the Executive Board gets to discuss the question. And Councillor Vick said that he has been a great supporter of the offline alignment. He has yet to be presented with any alternative scheme which had reduced environmental impact, but he wished to maintain very close linkage between this scheme and the city access process, because otherwise the two will not support each other. And officers and I together will summarise all of that discussion and present all those thoughts to the Executive Board in 3 weeks' time. And I believe that is all I have to do. Is that right? There's nothing else on the paper that I'm required to do. In which case, I will thank all those who have contributed to that debate, especially the members of the public, to whom I'm immensely grateful to you for attending the meeting and making your points and asking your questions, and to the officers for all the work that they've done, and the representative from McDonald. And at this point, I'm going to call a very, very slight pause whilst members take a comfort break, and anyone wishes to rearrange themselves, please do. Okay, thank you. We haven't quite finished the meeting, and who knows, we may have hours still to go, but we do have a few pages of the agenda left to work through. We've already lost 2 of our members who have pressing engagements. 3 members who have pressing engagements elsewhere, but we will make up in quality what we lack in quantity. So, where are we? Yes. Item 11, better public transport, Waterbeach to North East Cambridge. So we're going to receive the officer presentation and then we're going to have a debate. So, Peter. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Just say
yes.
that,
Oh, of course, yes.
Yes.
Right
South Cambs councillors, I think, ought to declare an interest because South Cambs owns the lease on 2 properties in Cambridge Science Park.
Right then, thank you very much. So we've noted that, haven't we? Yes. Thank you very much for the clarification. I'm sorry to not to have allowed you to say that before launching into the report. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Three short reports, all of which will be coming back to you in relatively short order. Indeed, the first 2 will come back to you at the next meeting cycle. So in terms of Waterbeach to North East Cambridge project, this is a short update that simply says technical work is ongoing. We are out engaging with stakeholders in terms of pre-consultation, which is something we've learned from our other experience. So talk before we go out to formal consultation. And in a sense, that's the reason why it's before you, because if a key stakeholder then comes to you and you ask me what's going on, that's a perfectly legitimate challenge, which I'd rather avoid if I could. And so that work is going on. Those conversations are going on. This will come back to you in June with initial proposals, a first go at a public consultation, and there will be far more detail for you to get under the skin of at that point. And if you just think this meeting was deferred from December, so there was a bit more of a gap than is currently the case. I hope that's sufficient, Chair, but of course we'll answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Thank you, Councillor Williams.
I apologise, it isn't actually a question, it's just following an email that's just been sent round to us about a car in the car park that's left the lights on. If anyone's arrived in AX08KZT, they might want to go turn their lights off.
Right then, can you repeat the number in case?
Yeah. Sorry. AX08KZT, Citroen C4. Is it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, you are released to turn the lights off.
Anyway, moving on.
Yes. Okay. Look. Okay. Right then. Does anyone have any questions on this paper? Councillor Solomon. Yeah.
It's only to pick a comment, and it's to pick up the theme for today on both, or for the theme from me for today on both this one and the Eastern Access project. Just to, given the criticisms that I've made of process and working up a breadth of potentially winning alternatives, let's make sure that we've learnt the lessons from other processes and do a really good job on these.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you have anything specific to say about that?
Clearly, we will take those comments on board.
Yeah. Right then. What? No, quite. But it's a theme that has run through all your contributions, Councillor Solomon, and it's one I think that we would do well to.
Chair, actually, could I make a more substantive comment? So actually, the reason why you're seeing these reports now are because the process has changed. So we are out now talking to key stakeholders to try and articulate the problem, to try and manage expectations, to try and get a degree of consensus before we actually put pen to paper and then embark upon a process that inevitably takes us on a conveyor belt and involves me coming back to you and going, we are following Department for Transport guidelines. So actually, this is a fundamentally different approach. We've learned from our experiences, not just on Cambourne and Cambridge, but also on the likes of Histon Road. It's worked very successfully currently on Madingley Road. We're out to consultation on that. So actually, forgive the sort of rather flippant answer previously. This is a reflection that we are trying to do things differently.
So members, the next steps are outlined in paragraph 4.1. Are you all content that the Executive Board should be allowed to launch that, should it so wish? Yep, nods around the table. That's great. That's dispatched item 11. So on to item 12, which is the Eastern Access Project.
Thank you, Chair. My introduction's almost exactly the same, apart from it is Eastern Access rather than Waterbeach, and a slight subtle difference in that whilst this will come back to you in your next meeting cycle, we won't then immediately be seeking to initiate consultation because we want to do Waterbeach first, and we want this to align as much as we can with the local plan process. So in discussions with local planning authority colleagues, they're more content that the Eastern Access just slips a little bit because it's more hand in glove in terms of that work.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor.
It's a comment on consultation, actually. I mean, it's more of a blob than a corridor, this one. And it does involve an awful lot of parish councils, particularly those on the fringe, like Stoke-on-Quay and the Wilbrahams. So can we make sure that we do cover all the parishes around the corridor, as well as those within the corridor? Because obviously they have an interest in the corridor, you know, so far as getting to the park and ride or whatever, and the greenways. So I would be grateful if you could make sure that happens.
We will.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I have a similar comment to also make sure you consult with the people beyond this route, so that, because they'll be affected coming from further afield into Cambridge as well. I speak with experience from the Histon Road project, where the people in Cottenham weren't consulted about the impact on their bus route into Cambridge. So I would like to think that in this project that the people beyond Cambridge, further out, are actually included in the consultation because of the potential impact on their journeys as well.
Yes, Councillor Massey.
So Newmarket Road is in my ward of Abbey Ward. It is hugely congested. Buses get stuck down there regularly, particularly on match days. Added to the list on 3.2, which is on page 150, we have a Lidl's now joining, we have Aldi's joining, Tesco's, Asda, Marks and Spencer, all the food shopping you can think of, which is just going to encourage more trips, and that's happening this year. So as much as I know that we need to be looking at Waterbeach sooner, we also have marshals which are talking about leaving and presumably building on their site. And I just want to confirm, now I presume that the red dotted line is just the study area, not where you're thinking of putting something through Coldham's Common, because that was a question for quite a lot of people when I showed them this.
Right there.
And the other point I want to make out is the McDonald's Wadlows Road roundabout, which is a nightmare, to say the very, very least. It gets, lots of people are queuing for McDonald's and they block that roundabout, and then that means that Newmarket Road then gets blocked, and it's a huge nightmare, and it really does need looking at a lot sooner than I think we are able to. So it would be good to see if we could find an interim solution in the meantime.
Right, thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes, Councillor Kavanagh.
I mean, thanks for the map. I just find it's in relation to a comment just made by my colleague. It says land south of Coldham's Lane. The question is Coldham's Lane going to be, upgraded, or is this part of the scheme? I just find it hard to discern from the map the exact route. I mean,
We don't know yet, that's why we're...
You don't know, so it's, but it could be.
It's possible. But we need to do that with the important thing, particularly with this, is the interrelationship with the emerging local plan. What's currently committed, but what are the other issues that may well be emerging in this facility? So that's what we need to take account of.
Right then, do you want to answer any of the other questions that members had? So can you assure Councillor Batty that the dotted red line is not...
Sorry, I was nodding or gesticulating. Yes,
yeah,
I can assure.
Okay.
And we will take away whether there's any shorter-term measures, but I'm not promising we will take away.
Yeah. Okay. And you're going to engage all the parish councils, and you're going to extend the reach of the consultation beyond the study area, yes, etc., etc. So in that case, the next steps are very similar to the previous one, except that it's going to be done after Waterbeach. Have I got that correct? Yeah. Okay. Right then, and that takes us into item 13. The Whittlesford Station Transport Infrastructure Strategy. And I guess that's back to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Again, another short one, but with a sort of a particular point at the end. So you'll be aware of the work we're doing at Whittlesford, multi-agency approach, out to consultation, broad support, action plan needs to be developed. So that work is ongoing and will be reported back to you. But it does pick up the sort of the sense of urgency and some of the issues that have been raised about what short-term measures we could do. There's a particular point in this report that says increasingly it's becoming apparent that on-street parking enforcement is currently and will be an emerging issue in South Cambridgeshire going forward. So following discussions with colleagues at the Highway Authority, following discussions with the South Cambridge District Council, this is something that we want to explore because there's a process to go through, it's consultation, but again we just wanted to ensure that everybody's aware we will be formally exploring this if the Executive Board agrees it, because of some of the pressure points that already exist and also how it links to our plan. So Whittlesford, additional parking, people need to be encouraged to go there. Foxton we're looking at. There will be particular issues on Waterbeach when that site comes forward. And given that ordinarily it takes 18 months, 2 years to introduce civil parking enforcement following the consultation process and the like, we'd rather, if we're going to do it, start that process sooner rather than later. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yes, Councillor John Williams.
Yeah, thank you. On paragraph 5.3, talk about public transport. The last sentence of that, basically, you seem to be saying that if Stagecoach won't serve Duxford and the Imperial War Museum, then you're not going to basically fund the bus access improvements. Am I right in that? I mean, it does seem that we are basically saying, well, if Stagecoach aren't prepared to do it on a commercial basis, then we won't have the busing access, and surely the whole point of having a travel hub is for it to be served by public transport.
And we want the commitment from the local commercial bus operator that they're going to serve it. So we will put in infrastructure that facilitates them doing it. What we would jolly well like them is to do it. So that's as written.
Yeah, but it's just the word, it's a prerequisite, i.e. you're not going to go ahead with it unless you get Stagecoach to agree to it.
Happy to reflect on the wording.
Right then, I've got Councillor Heather Williams first, and then yeah.
Thank you. It's just possibly a wording issue as well on page 158. When you say about local engagements, and you mentioned parish councils, in particular, I think South Cambs, parish councils do as a voluntary sector do an awful lot of work, and I think I know what you mean when you say update them regularly, but I think that perhaps wording, given what we've had from the others and the frustration, almost like a lesson learned approach, that we're not just going to update them with what we're doing, we're going to involve them in what we're doing. If that could be changed, please.
To involve them in what we're doing.
Yes, on the one word makes a difference. You can modify the report to the executive board, can't you? Along those lines. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, that's what we're here for. And the third member of the Williams name family.
Running out of steam as well. I agree this is a very complicated programme and lots of different agencies involved. My complexity goes further. You know, it links into Granta Park, potentially to the Genome Campus. It could be huge and complicated, and there's a train station, and there could be all sorts of things going on around there. So one reflection is, until we sort the road out, it's going to be another one of those things where it's a great sustainable transport hub that you can't get to, because that stretch of road is obviously extremely overburdened. And I know that's part of the scheme. My point actually was the same, was on 5.3, and perhaps in a different way. And it is the end of the day, and I don't want to be too harsh, but within the context of thousands of houses coming at the Genome Campus, potentially an agritech site, links to Granta Park, a discussion about whether Stagecoach are willing to put the City 7 service through there feels a little bit lacking ambition. And I know how much work the office has put into all these proposals, and I don't want to be too harsh. If that were to reflect the ambition of where we were going to, that if the City 7 stops there, we've sorted out that transport hub. I'm being slightly facetious, but you take my point. Yeah. Thank you.
Right then. Yes, Councillor Solomon? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. You're not an Assembly member, but I will bring you in. I'll concentrate on my Assembly members first. Yes, Councillor Solomon.
Just by way of clarification on the parking, so you'd bring a separate proposal for the whole of South Cambourne in terms of what's written here. So it'd be with the you'd bring forward a separate proposal for the whole of South Cambs working with the county on this.
I want approval to do the work that will then say this is the impact, this is how we would deliver it, and then that would come back as a specific report that would come through the Joint Assembly to the Executive Board in terms of a go, no-go decision.
Yeah, sorry, it's getting late in the day. I'm not making myself clear. Would that then be tied to specific GCP projects? So it would be enforcement around Whittlesford, it would be enforcement around a park and ride or whatever, or is it across the whole of the area?
I'm going to defer to the county's transport portfolio.
Perhaps just an observation, maybe for Andy, it actually is that Royston to Granta Park, there is currently a study ongoing which involves county members, South Cambourne members and members from Hertfordshire County Council as well on that particular corridor. So it may be sensible to pick that up for future reference because there is work, and certainly we've met already twice, and we have another meeting in the diary already. In answer back to Peter in respect of enforcement, entirely happy for South Cambs to engage with the county on enforcement across South Cambs. And we've already introduced it in the city, as you know. I'm quite happy to have that discussion. It's not an easy, quick fix, by the way, okay? That takes a bit of time, but County Council are entirely happy to open up the discussion between the two authorities.
Just a point of information.
Just to add to that, and then and it would be enforcement across the district, but the enforcement levels and the approach to enforcement would be agreed as part of the process with the respective authorities.
Yeah, and just a point of information that South Cambs doesn't have any car parking revenue.
Right then. Any other questions? No. So if you look at the bottom of page 158, 7.5, you'll see what is coming up for the Executive Board. Does anyone have any difficulties with the Executive Board going ahead on that basis? No, great stuff, excellent. So that's the end of that. Yes, the date of the next meeting is, yes, it's about 4 months since we had the last one. That's due to a lot of extraneous factors, of course, which are beyond our control. But the next one isn't until the 4th of June, which is also about, quite a long time, 3 months away. So I hope we all put that time to good use, and we all deserve a break. I think you've been fantastic today, members. We've done. I believe we have discharged our duty with quite a lot of well, not for me to say. Before I go, by that time, by the 4th of June, one of our members will have given birth. So she has been remarkably patient throughout the meeting, and we're incredibly grateful to her for attending in her gentle condition. And I know it's not been entirely comfortable for her, but we are very grateful to you for sticking out the whole day, and we all wish you well. So thank you very much, and a safe journey home, everyone.